The parking lot of the Veterans Affairs Clinic stretched empty under the late November sun. Cracked asphalt reflecting heat that had no business being there in Montana this time of year. James Thornton sat in his truck with the engine off, windows down, staring at the orange prescription bottle in his calloused palm. Sertraline, 50 milligrams. Take one daily for anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. The label had worn thin from his thumb rubbing across it these past 6 months, a nervous habit he'd picked up somewhere between the divorce papers and the unemployment line. He twisted the cap, shook 2 pills into his hand, then poured them back. The bottle went into the glove compartment, next to 3 others just like it. A pharmacy of chemicals meant to smooth the jagged edges of a mind that had seen too much and processed too little. 42 years old, and his life fit into the cab of a 15-year-old Ford F-250 with a failing transmission and 200,000 miles of bad decisions worn into the seats. The VA building loomed behind him, brick and glass and the peculiar sadness of government architecture trying to look hopeful. He'd driven 4 hours from San Diego for this appointment with Dr. Patterson, a kind woman with patient eyes who kept asking him to talk about Iraq, about the water pump, about the explosion that killed 7 men while he was 50 yards away taking a piss behind a Humvee, about the guilt that sat in his chest like a stone he couldn't cough up. But he hadn't gone inside. Instead, he'd sat here for 90 minutes watching other veterans shuffle in and out, recognizing that particular walk they all shared. The slight hunch, the way their eyes tracked movement, the careful distance they maintained from everyone, even each other. Brothers in arms who'd come home to find the war had followed them, setting up camp in their nightmares and trigger responses, and the way they couldn't stand in lines at the grocery store without their backs against a wall. His phone buzzed against the dashboard. Carol, his ex-wife, probably calling about the custody hearing next week. He let it go to voicemail, watching the screen light up with her name, then fade to black. They'd been divorced 8 months, but she still called with that mixture of concern and disappointment he'd grown so familiar with during their 12-year marriage. The tone that said she wanted to help, but had finally accepted she couldn't. The voicemail notification popped up. He ignored it, reaching instead for the envelope on the passenger seat. It had arrived 3 days ago, forwarded from his old address in Coronado. The return address simply said Santos, with a post office box in a town called Hollowbrook, Montana. Population 4,000, middle of nowhere. He'd had to look it up on a map. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the kind kids used in school. The handwriting was deliberate, each letter carefully formed in the style of someone who'd learned English as a second language and took pride in getting it right. Mr. Thornton, it began, your father is dying. He has asked for you. The doctors say 3 weeks, maybe less. I know you think he passed in 1995. You were told this to protect you. He is at the ranch, the same one you remember. He wants to see you before the end. Please come. There are things you need to know, things he needs to say. Maria Santos. Jim had read it maybe 100 times, each reading surfacing different memories. His father, William Thornton. Bill to everyone who knew him, a man who'd left when Jim was 8 years old and never looked back. Or that's what Jim had believed for 34 years. His mother had told him Bill died overseas, some construction accident in South America. There'd been no body, no funeral, just the absence that became normal over time. Now this letter suggested everything he'd been told was a lie. The rational part of his mind, the engineer who'd spent 10 years in the Navy Seabees designing and building infrastructure in the world's worst places, wanted to dismiss it as a scam, some elaborate scheme to extract money from a grieving son. But the irrational part, the part that still remembered how his father's hands looked when they were teaching him to weld, wanted desperately for it to be true. He pulled out his phone, opened the voicemail from Carol. Her voice came through the truck's speakers, tired and strained. Jim, it's me. Derek filed an amended custody petition today. He's asking for full custody of Luke, no visitation. He cited the incident at O'Malley's last week and your missed therapy appointments. My lawyer says we need to respond by Friday or the judge will rule in his favor by default. I know you're going through something, but Luke needs his father. He needs you to show up. Please call me back. The message ended. Jim sat with his hands on the steering wheel, knuckles white. The incident at O'Malley's. 3 nights ago, he'd been having a beer, trying to quiet the noise in his head, when some kid bumped into him at the bar. Just an accident. The kid had apologized immediately, but something about it, the sudden contact, the surprise, had triggered something dark and immediate in Jim's nervous system. He'd grabbed the kid's wrist, twisted it behind his back, had him face down on the bar before his conscious mind caught up with his training. The kid was fine. Shaken, but fine. Jim had apologized, left cash for everyone's drinks, and walked out. But someone had filmed it, and someone had sent it to Derek Walsh, the man who'd married Jim's ex-wife and was now trying to take his son away permanently. Derek was a sheriff's deputy, clean cut, stable income, big house in the suburbs with a pool and a two-car garage. Everything Jim used to be before the deployments and the nightmares and the day he'd punched his supervisor at the engineering firm and lost the last job anyone would give him. Luke, 10 years old, dark hair like Jim's, Carol's green eyes, and a quietness that worried Jim more than he wanted to admit. The kind of quiet that came from watching your parents destroy each other, then watching your father destroy himself. Luke had been 5 when Jim deployed to Iraq, 7 when he came back different, 9 when Carol finally filed for divorce, now 10 and probably better off without a father who couldn't make it through a simple conversation without his hands shaking. Jim started the truck. The engine turned over rough, coughing black smoke before settling into an uneven idle. He needed to get back to San Diego, needed to call Carol's lawyer, needed to figure out how to prove to a judge he wasn't a danger to his own son. But instead, he found himself pulling out onto the highway, heading north, toward Montana, toward Hollowbrook, toward a father who was supposed to be dead. The drive took 3 days. Jim stopped at cheap motels where the beds smelled like bleach and cigarettes, where he could park the truck right outside the room and keep one eye on it through threadbare curtains. He didn't sleep much. The dreams were worse on the road, probably because his body knew it was heading towards something, some reckoning it didn't have words for yet. He called Carol from somewhere in Idaho, got her voicemail, left a message that he was dealing with a family emergency and would call her soon. He knew it sounded like an excuse, knew Derek would use it as more evidence of instability. But something was pulling him forward, some need that overrode logic and responsibility and everything else. The landscape changed as he drove north and east. California's brown hills gave way to Nevada's desert, then Idaho's farms, then Montana's endless sky. He'd forgotten how big the sky got up here, how it pressed down on you with all that empty blue, making you feel small and exposed. His memories of Montana were fractured, childhood impressions more than clear images. The ranch, the barn, his father's workshop, the smell of motor oil and fresh-cut lumber. And then his mother's face, pale and thin, telling him his father wasn't coming back. Hollowbrook appeared on a faded green sign as he crested a hill on the 3rd day. Population 4,127, founded 1882. The town itself was a strip of buildings along the highway, the kind of place that had probably been built to service ranchers and hadn't changed much in a century. A gas station, a diner, a feed store, a bar called the Broken Spoke with motorcycles parked outside, an auto parts place with sun-bleached inventory in the windows. Jim pulled into the gas station, filled the truck, went inside to pay. The clerk was a kid, maybe 19, with the hollow eyes of someone already planning their escape from small-town life. He took Jim's cash without interest, counted change with practiced efficiency. "You know where I can find the Santos place?" Jim asked. "Maria Santos?" The kid's eyes sharpened slightly. The first sign of real attention. "You family? Just need to talk to her." The kid pointed north. "Take River Road about 6 miles. Big white house with blue shutters. Can't miss it. Only house out there besides the old Thornton Ranch." The name landed like a punch. Jim kept his face neutral. "The Thornton Ranch still occupied?" The kid shrugged. "Old Bill's place. Nobody's seen him in months. Folks figured he finally died. That place has been falling apart for years." Jim thanked him, walked back to his truck. His hands were shaking again. He sat in the driver's seat, breathing slowly, counting backwards from 10 like Dr. Patterson had taught him. The panic attack crested and receded, leaving him sweaty and exhausted. River Road was gravel and washboard ruts, the kind of road that shook loose every bolt in the suspension. The land on either side stretched flat and brown, interrupted by barbed wire fences and the occasional cluster of cattle. Mountains rose in the distance, already snow-capped despite the calendar saying it was only November. The sky had gone gray, threatening weather. The Santos house matched the kid's description. White with blue shutters, well-maintained, flower boxes still holding the dried remains of summer plants. Jim pulled into the gravel drive, killed the engine. Before he could open the door, an elderly woman emerged from the house. She was small, maybe 5'2", with silver gray hair pulled back in a bun, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots that had seen decades of use. Her face was weathered in the way of people who'd spent their lives outdoors, but her eyes were sharp and kind. She studied Jim as he climbed out of the truck, and he saw recognition flicker across her features. "You're taller than I expected," she said, "but you have his hands." Jim looked down at his own hands, calloused and scarred from years of construction work. He'd never thought about them looking like anyone else's. "Maria Santos," the woman said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Her grip was firm, confident. Jim introduced himself, though clearly she already knew who he was. She invited him inside, but he hesitated, suddenly unsure if he wanted to know what came next. "Is he really alive?" Jim asked. Maria's expression softened with something like sympathy. "Yes, he's at the ranch. Has been for 40 years. He never left Montana. But my mother said he died. There was a funeral." "There was a story," Maria corrected gently. "Come inside. There's coffee, and we need to talk before you see him." The kitchen was warm and clean, smelling of fresh bread and something baking in the oven. Maria poured coffee into heavy ceramic mugs, set one in front of Jim at a wooden table worn smooth by generations of use. She sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her own mug. "Your father asked me to write that letter," she began. "He's been sick, cancer. The doctors give him weeks, maybe a month. He's refused treatment, says he's made his peace." "Why now?" Jim's voice came out harder than he intended. 34 years. Why reach out now?" "Because dying clarifies things. And because you have a son. Bill only recently learned about Luke. He wants to meet his grandson, and he wants to explain why he left." "There's no explanation that makes it okay." Maria nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but there's truth, and truth matters, even when it doesn't fix things." She stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a worn shoebox. Inside were photographs, letters, newspaper clippings. She spread them on the table between them. Jim recognized his own face in many of the photos. School pictures, his high school graduation, his Navy boot camp portrait, his wedding to Carol, recent pictures of Luke. "He was watching," Maria said quietly. "He never stopped watching, every milestone, every achievement. He has boxes of these, kept track of your whole life." Jim felt something crack in his chest. If he cared so much, why not come back? Why let me think he was dead? Maria pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellow with age. The headline read, "Local Engineers Patent Dispute Ends in Corporate Victory." The date was 1982. The article described a lawsuit between William Thornton and a man named Raymond Cole over water purification technology. Cole had won. His company, Clearwater Holdings, had gone on to become a major player in municipal water systems. "Your father and Raymond Cole were partners," Maria explained. "They met in Vietnam, both engineers. They designed a water filtration system together for field hospitals. After the war, they tried to commercialize it. But Cole wanted to sell to big corporations. Your father wanted to keep it affordable, license it to nonprofits. They fought. Cole had better lawyers, more money. He took the patent, cut your father out completely." Jim studied the article. There was a photo of his father, younger but recognizable. Beside him, Raymond Cole. Two men with their arms around each other, smiling for the camera. Partners, friends. "Your father tried to fight it in court," Maria continued. "Lost everything, his savings, his reputation. Cole spread rumors that Bill was unstable, paranoid. By 1985, Bill couldn't find work anywhere. That's when Cole's people came to the ranch." "What people?" Maria's expression darkened. "Men in suits. They told your father that if he didn't stop fighting, if he didn't disappear, there would be consequences. They mentioned you specifically. Said children get sick sometimes, school water supplies get contaminated, accidents happen." Jim's hands tightened around the coffee mug. "They threatened me? They threatened everyone he loved. Your mother was sick by then, cancer. Bill believed they'd poisoned her somehow, though he could never prove it. He made a choice. He left, staged his death, sent money through me, watched from a distance, kept you safe the only way he knew how." The story settled over Jim like a weight. He wanted to reject it, wanted to believe his father was just a coward who'd abandoned his family. That would be easier than this, Easier than imagining a man who'd sacrificed everything, including his son's love, to keep that son alive. I don't know if I can forgive him, Jim said. He's not asking for forgiveness. He's asking for 3 weeks. Time to show you what he's built. Time to explain. Time to meet his grandson. Luke can't come here. I'm in a custody battle. His stepfather is trying to prove I'm unstable. Maria stood, walked to the window overlooking the land that stretched toward the mountains. Then come alone first. See your father. Decide for yourself what you want to do. Jim drained his coffee, stood. Where is he? 6 miles further north on River Road. You'll see the gate, same place you remember. I don't remember much. You will, Maria said. The land remembers even when we don't. Jim thanked her, walked back to his truck. The sky had grown darker, clouds rolling in from the west. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment, then started the engine and headed north. The ranch appeared exactly as Maria had promised. A gate marked the entrance, wooden posts weathered gray, a sign hanging crooked that read Thornton. The driveway stretched a quarter-mile through overgrown fields, grass gone to seed, fence posts leaning at angles. But as Jim drove closer, he noticed something strange. The fields might look neglected, but running through them was an elaborate system of irrigation channels, all flowing with water that caught the fading light. The house came into view. 2 stories, white paint peeling, shutters hanging askew. Several windows were broken. The porch sagged in the middle. It looked abandoned, forgotten. But on the porch sat a man in a rocking chair, and as Jim pulled to a stop, the man stood. William Thornton was old now. That was Jim's first thought. 72 according to the math, but looking older. Thin in the way of serious illness, his skin loose over bones that had once carried more weight. He wore jeans and a faded flannel shirt, work boots scarred by decades of labor. His face was weathered like old leather, mapped with lines that told stories Jim would never know. But his eyes were clear and sharp, and they were the same color as Jim's own. For a long moment, neither man moved. They stood separated by 20 feet of dirt and 34 years of silence. Jim's heart hammered in his chest. All the questions he'd prepared, all the anger he'd carried, evaporated in the face of this moment. Bill spoke first. His voice was rough, like sandpaper on wood. Thought you'd come. Jim found his voice. Got your letter. Maria's letter. Same thing. She's been my voice when I couldn't speak. Bill gestured to the house. Coffee's on. We should talk. I'm not here for coffee. I'm here for answers. Bill nodded slowly. Fair enough. But answers take time, and I don't have much time left. Maria said you're dying. 6 weeks ago, they said 6 months. Yesterday, they said 3 weeks. Tomorrow, who knows? Come inside. It's getting cold. Bill turned and walked into the house, not looking back to see if Jim would follow. For a moment, Jim considered leaving, driving back to San Diego, forgetting this whole thing. But his feet carried him forward, up the creaking porch steps, through the door into a house he'd last seen as a child. Inside was cleaner than the exterior suggested. The furniture was old but well-maintained, arranged with military precision. Everything had its place. The kitchen was spotless, dishes drying in a rack by the sink. Coffee percolated on an old stovetop, filling the air with its bitter warmth. Bill poured 2 cups, set them on the table, sat in a chair that had probably been his for decades. Jim remained standing. Why didn't you come back? After the threat passed. After I grew up. Why stay dead? Bill sipped his coffee, taking time with the answer. The threat never passed. Cole built an empire on our patent. Clearwater Holdings. You've probably heard of them. They supply water systems to 300 cities, worth billions, all based on technology we designed in a tent in Saigon. That doesn't answer my question. Bill set down his cup. I stayed gone because coming back would have put you in danger. Cole's reach grew. Politicians, judges, law enforcement. He has people everywhere. If I'd shown up, he would have found a way to destroy you just to hurt me. So you watched from a distance, collected pictures like some kind of stalker. I protected you the only way I could. Jim's anger finally broke through. You abandoned me. Mom died thinking you were dead. I grew up thinking my father was too much of a coward to stick around. You don't get to call that protection. Bill's expression didn't change. You're right, I don't. But it's the truth whether you accept it or not. The 2 men stared at each other across the kitchen table. Jim saw stubbornness in his father's face. The same set of jaw he saw in his own mirror every morning. He wanted to leave, wanted to reject all of this. But something kept him rooted. Maria mentioned I have a grandson, Bill said quietly. Luke. Jim's defenses went up immediately. You don't get to know about Luke. Does he look like you? Despite himself, Jim answered. He has his mother's eyes. Everything else is Thornton. What's he like? The question broke something in Jim. He sat down heavily in the chair across from his father. He's quiet, too quiet, smart, loves building things, taking stuff apart to see how it works. And he's scared of me. Scared? Jim's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I have PTSD. From Iraq. Sometimes I get angry. Luke saw me lose it once. Threw a coffee mug at the wall. He was 6. Now he flinches when I move too fast. Bill absorbed this. You get help? I try, medication, therapy. Doesn't always work. My ex-wife remarried. Her new husband is filing for full custody. Says I'm unstable. Dangerous. Are you? Jim met his father's eyes. I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm holding a grenade with the pin pulled, just waiting to explode. Bill stood, walked through the window. Outside, darkness was falling. The irrigation system still flowed, water catching the last light. When I came back from Vietnam, they didn't call it PTSD. They called it being weak. You dealt with it alone, or you drank. I chose both for a while. Did it get better? Bill turned back to face his son. It got manageable. Work helped. Having something to build. Something bigger than my own head. That's what saved me. What did you build? Bill smiled, the first real expression Jim had seen from him. Tomorrow I'll show you. Tonight you should rest. There's a room upstairs. Your old room, I kept it. I'm not staying. Where are you planning to sleep? Nearest motel is 40 miles back in town. Jim hadn't thought that far ahead. Bill pressed his advantage. Stay tonight. Tomorrow I'll show you what I've been working on for 40 years. Then you can decide if you want anything to do with me. Against his better judgment, Jim nodded. One night, Bill showed him upstairs. The hallway was lined with photographs, and Jim paused to look at them. His mother, young and beautiful. His parents' wedding. Baby pictures of Jim himself. But there were gaps, spaces where photos had been removed. The story of a family interrupted. The bedroom was exactly as Jim remembered it, frozen in time. A twin bed with a faded blue comforter, a desk with model airplanes he'd built as a kid, posters of fighter jets on the walls. It was like walking into a museum of his own childhood. Bill lingered in the doorway. I changed the sheets this morning. Bathroom is down the hall. I wake up early, around 4. I'll be working on the irrigation system if you want to find me. What is that system? Jim asked. I've never seen anything like it. That's what I want to show you. It's not just irrigation. It's the answer to everything. Bill left, his footsteps creaking down the stairs. Jim sat on the bed, feeling the springs give exactly as they had when he was 8 years old. Through the window he could see the barn, massive and dark against the evening sky. Lights glowed inside it, warm and inviting, suggesting someone still used it regularly. Jim lay back on the bed, not bothering to undress. He didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion from 3 days of driving caught up with him, and he slipped into dreams without meaning to. He woke to darkness in the sound of screaming. His own screaming. He was on the floor beside the bed, his back against the wall, hands shaking. The nightmare had been the usual one. The water pump, the explosion, the smell of burning fuel and copper pennies. His friends dying while he survived. A knock on the door. Jim? Bill's voice. You okay? Fine, just a dream. Silence. Then Bill's footsteps retreating. Jim stayed on the floor until his breathing slowed, until the shaking stopped. He checked his phone. 3 a.m. Messages from Carol. 2 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize, probably her lawyer. He was about to try sleeping again when he noticed light outside the window. Not dawn, something else. He stood, looked out, and saw the barn fully illuminated now, every window glowing. And walking toward it, moving with purpose despite his illness, was his father. Jim pulled on his boots, descended the stairs quietly. The November air bit at him as he crossed the yard toward the barn. The massive doors stood open, revealing an interior that stopped him cold. This wasn't a barn anymore. It had been transformed into something else entirely. A workshop, a laboratory, an engineer's cathedral. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with tools arranged in perfect order. Blueprints hung on every available surface. In the center stood what looked like a large cylindrical tank, maybe 8 feet tall and 4 feet wide, with pipes running in and out of it in complex patterns. Bill stood beside the tank, making notes in a journal. He looked up as Jim approached, showing no surprise. Couldn't sleep either? Bill asked. Jim walked closer, studying the tank and its connections. What is this? The answer to 40 years of work. Bill set down his journal, laid a hand on the metal surface with something like affection. Water purification, biological filtration, self-sustaining, no electricity, no chemicals, just nature accelerated. Jim circled the system, his engineer's mind analyzing what he saw. The design was elegant, layers of different materials visible through inspection ports. Gravel, sand, what looked like activated carbon, and something else. Something growing. Is that algae? Jim asked. Bacteria colonies. Specially cultivated. They break down contaminants, heavy metals, even pharmaceutical residue. The system mimics natural wetland filtration, but does it 100 times faster. How long has this been running? This prototype, 5 years. But I've been refining the design since 1979. Bill pulled out a folder, handed it to Jim. Test results. Water quality analysis. Every week for 45 years. Jim flipped through page after page of data, his eyes widening. The numbers were extraordinary. Water going in contaminated with agricultural runoff, industrial chemicals, biological waste. Water coming out cleaner than bottled spring water. And the system required no power, no maintenance beyond occasional monitoring. This is impossible, Jim said. Nothing filters this efficiently without massive energy input. Nothing man-made, Bill agreed. But nature does it every day. I just learned to work with nature instead of against it. Why hide this? Why not publish, share it, prove Cole wrong? Bill's expression hardened. I tried that once. Look what happened. Cole would crush this before it saw daylight. His entire business model depends on expensive, high-maintenance systems that need constant replacement parts. This would make him obsolete overnight. So you've been sitting on revolutionary technology for 40 years? Not sitting, perfecting, and documenting everything. Bill walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out drawer after drawer filled with journals. Every test, every modification, every failure and success. All recorded, all dated, all signed and witnessed by Maria. Jim felt dizzy. Why show me now? Because I'm dying, and this needs to outlive me. Bill met his son's eyes. I need you to finish what I started. Take this public, use it to help people. Prove Cole built his empire on stolen technology. I'm not an engineer anymore. I lost my license after the incident at work. I'm unemployed, unstable, about to lose custody of my son. You're a CB. You built infrastructure in war zones. You understand systems, logistics, construction under pressure. Bill's voice grew stronger. And you need something to fight for. Something bigger than your own pain. This is crazy. I came here for answers about why you left, not to get recruited into some 40-year-old revenge scheme. It's not revenge, Bill said quietly. It's justice. Cole has been poisoning people with substandard systems for decades, charging cities millions for technology that fails. While this, he gestured to the tank, could provide clean water for pennies per person. How many people have suffered because I was too afraid to fight back? Jim looked at the system, at his father, at the barn full of evidence and innovation. Part of him wanted to walk away, return to San Diego, face his custody battle and his broken life. But another part, the part that used to love building things, solving problems, making a difference, stirred to life for the first time in years. 3 weeks, Bill said. Stay 3 weeks, learn the system, meet the people whose water this cleanse, then decide. I can't bring Luke here. The custody battle. Come alone. Work with me. When you're ready, when you understand what this is, then we'll figure out the next steps. Bill extended his hand. 3 weeks. Then I'll die, and you can forget all this if you want. Jim stared at his father's outstretched hand, calloused palm, scarred knuckles. The same hands that had taught him to weld when he was 6 years old. The same hands that had packed a bag and walked away when he was 8. The same hands that had spent 40 years building something that could help millions of people, if only someone had the courage to bring it to light. He shook his father's hand. 3 weeks. Outside, the first hints of dawn touched the Montana sky. In the distance, cattle lowed. Water rushed through irrigation channels, and 2 men stood in a barn full of secrets, beginning the slow work of becoming father and son again. The next morning arrived cold and clear, frost covering everything in crystal. Jim woke to find his father already gone, the house silent except for the ticking of an old clock in the hallway. Coffee sat in a thermos on the kitchen table, along with a note written in Bill's precise handwriting, working on south fence line. Come find me when you're ready. Jim poured coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching the land wake up. The ranch sprawled in every direction, 400 acres of it, according to Maria. Most looked neglected, but the irrigation system ran through it all, a network of channels and pipes that defied the apparent abandonment. He could see his father in the distance, a small figure, working on a fence post, moving with the careful economy of someone who knew his body's limits. His phone buzzed. Carol, he'd been avoiding her calls but couldn't anymore. He answered. Jim. Her voice carried relief and frustration in equal measure. Where are you? Montana. Family emergency. What family? Your dad's been dead for 30 years. Jim walked outside, needing movement for this conversation. It's complicated. I'll explain when I get back. When is that? The custody hearing is in 2 weeks. Derek's lawyer is arguing you've abandoned Luke. I haven't abandoned anyone. I'm dealing with something important. More important than your son? The question hit hard. Jim watched his father in the distance, thought about abandonment and choices and what it meant to be a father. I'm trying to figure out how to be the kind of dad Luke deserves. That takes work. Carol's voice softened. Jim, I know you're struggling, but running away to Montana isn't the answer. I'm not running, I'm learning something. About where I come from, about what it means to build something that lasts. A pause, then Carol said quietly, Luke asked about you yesterday, wanted to know if you were mad at him. Jim closed his eyes. Why would he think that? Because you left without saying goodbye. Because Derek told him you were dealing with personal problems. Because he's 10 and doesn't understand why his father keeps disappearing. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm working on being better. You can tell him yourself. Call him tonight. I will. After Carol hung up, Jim stood in the cold morning air, feeling the weight of it all. His father had left to protect him. Now Jim was leaving to protect his son in a different way, by trying to understand the pattern that kept repeating itself across generations. But was he protecting Luke, or just running from the hard work of being present? He walked across the frozen ground toward where Bill worked. His father looked up as he approached, nodded greeting, returned to stretching wire between fence posts. Jim watched for a moment, then picked up the tool Bill had set aside and began helping without being asked. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, the only sound the creak of wire and the distant call of crows. Your ex-wife? Bill asked finally. Yeah, she thinks I'm running away. Are you? Jim considered that, maybe. Or maybe I'm running towards something. Bill hammered a staple into place. Both can be true. They finished the fence section, gathered tools, started walking back toward the barn. The land stretched around them in every direction, brown grass and shade, and the mountains watching from the west. Jim felt something shift in his chest, some small loosening of the constant tension he carried. You know anything about the custody battle? Jim asked. Maria keeps me informed. Your wife's new husband is a deputy sheriff. Stable job, clean record, good provider. Everything I'm not. Bill stopped walking, turned to face his son. You're a combat veteran with PTSD trying to rebuild your life after losing everything. That's not nothing. That's harder than having a steady paycheck. The court won't see it that way. Then change their minds. Show them what you're building. Bill gestured toward the barn. You spent 10 years in the military making water systems in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now learn to build something even better. Something that could help millions. That's the kind of father Luke needs. One who builds instead of destroys. They spent the rest of the day in the barn, Bill teaching Jim the intricacies of the filtration system, how the bacterial colonies worked, how the layers of filtration targeted different contaminants, how the whole thing was self-regulating, adjusting to changes in water quality automatically. It was brilliant, elegant, the kind of engineering that came from decades of patient observation and refinement. As they worked, Jim's hands remembered old skills, welding, plumbing, the satisfaction of making something fit perfectly. His mind quieted in a way it hadn't in months, focused entirely on the problem in front of him. No room for nightmares or guilt or fear. Around noon, a truck pulled into the yard. Maria Santos climbed out carrying bags of groceries and what looked like a casserole dish. She greeted them both, shooed them out of the barn, set up lunch at a picnic table that had probably been there for decades. You two look like you're actually working together, she observed. Miracles do happen. Don't jinx it, Bill said. but there was warmth in his voice that Jim hadn't heard before. Over sandwiches and coffee, Maria told stories about the ranch, how Bill had bought it in 1980, right after losing the patent case, how he'd slowly acquired the water rights to the entire aquifer beneath it, how neighboring ranchers had thought he was crazy, irrigating fields he didn't plant, maintaining systems that seemed to serve no purpose. But your father knew what he was doing, Maria said. Every ranch within 10 miles gets their water from the aquifer, and every drop goes through Bill's filtration system first. They just don't know it. Jim looked at his father. You've been cleaning everyone's water for 40 years? Testing, Bill corrected. Proving it works, documenting everything. When the time comes to reveal this, I'll have decades of real-world data. Why not reveal it now, Jim pressed. While you're still alive to see it? Bill's expression clouded. Because coal is still out there, still powerful, still connected. He'd bury this and destroy anyone involved. I won't risk that as long as I'm breathing. But you'll risk it after you're gone? When I'm the one who has to face him? Bill met his son's eyes. You're stronger than I was. You've already survived things that would break most men. You have a son to fight for. That makes you dangerous in ways Cole won't expect. After lunch, Maria pulled Jim aside while Bill went to rest. The cancer tires him, she said quietly. He pushes himself too hard, trying to teach you everything in whatever time he has left. How much time does he really have? Maria's eyes were sad. The doctors said weeks. But Bill's stubborn. Could be longer, could be shorter. Every day is borrowed at this point. Jim watched his father disappear into the house, moving slowly but with purpose. Why did you help him all these years? What's in this for you? Maria smiled. Bill and I have been friends for 40 years. When he came back from the patent trial, broken and angry, I offered him a place to stay. He chose to buy this ranch instead. Asked me to help him build something that mattered. How could I say no? You love him. Maria didn't deny it. We've loved each other a long time, but he never moved on from your mother. Kept her memory like a shrine. I accepted that. Some kinds of love don't need marriage or promises. They just need showing up. Jim thought about Carol, about the love they'd had that had curdled into resentment and fear. About Luke and the love he felt for his son that seemed to manifest as absence rather than presence. About his father and the twisted love that looked like abandonment but was supposedly protection. What am I supposed to do with all this? Jim asked. Learn what he's trying to teach you, then decide what kind of man you want to be. That night, Jim called Luke. Carol answered first, then put Luke on the line. His son's voice was small, tentative. Hey, buddy, Jim said, forcing warmth into his tone. How's school? Good. We're learning about water cycles in science. Jim smiled despite himself. Yeah, tell me about it. Luke explained evaporation and precipitation in aquifers, his voice gaining confidence as he talked about something he loved. Jim listened, asking questions, letting his son teach him. For 10 minutes, they were just father and son, connected by something as simple as a science lesson. Before they hung up, Luke asked, When are you coming home? Soon, Jim promised. I'm learning some stuff from your grandfather about water systems. Maybe when I get back, I can show you. I have a grandfather. Jim's throat tightened. Yeah, turns out I do. Long story. Is he nice? Jim thought about his father. The abandonment and the protection. The secrets and the innovation. The dying man trying desperately to pass on something that mattered. He's complicated, but I think you'd like him. Can I meet him? Jim wanted to say yes, wanted to bring Luke here and give him the grandfather Jim himself had been denied. But the custody battle loomed, maybe someday. After the call ended, Jim sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the immense Montana sky. The barn glowed with light where his father worked late into the night, still teaching, still building, still fighting in his own way. Jim understood something then. His father hadn't given up. He'd just changed battlefields. Instead of fighting Cole in courtrooms where the outcome was rigged, Bill had fought by building something Cole couldn't touch, by perfecting technology that would someday make Cole's empire obsolete, by turning abandonment into strategy and absence into the longest of long games. It wasn't the choice Jim would have made, but he was beginning to understand it. He went to the barn, found his father reviewing data sheets by lantern light. Bill looked up, surprised to see him. Thought you'd be sleeping, Bill said. Can't sleep much these days. Jim pulled up a stool beside his father. Teach me more about the bacteria colonies, how you cultivated them. Bill's face showed something Jim had never seen there before. Hope. He opened a journal, began explaining, and together they worked into the early hours of morning, father and son, building understanding one question at a time. Outside, the irrigation system flowed. The land held its secrets. And somewhere in San Diego, a 10-year-old boy fell asleep thinking about water cycles, not knowing he was part of a legacy that stretched back 40 years and forward into a future no one could predict yet. The first week passed in a rhythm Jim hadn't known he needed. Wake before dawn, work alongside his father. Learn systems that seemed simple but contained layers of complexity. Eat meals with Maria, who appeared daily with food and quiet wisdom. Call Luke each evening and hear about school and friends and the ordinary miracles of a 10-year-old's life. The ranch revealed itself slowly. What had looked like neglect was actually careful management. The overgrown fields were experiments in native grasses that filtered runoff before it reached the aquifer. The tilting fence posts were actually sensors measuring water table levels. The barn that seemed ready to collapse was engineered to last another century. Every joint reinforced, every surface treated against rot. Jim's hands remembered skills he thought he'd lost. His mind focused in ways the medication never achieved. And slowly, carefully, he and his father began talking about more than just engineering. One evening as they cleaned tools, Bill asked about a rock. Jim stiffened reflexively, but something about the barn's quiet, the honest work they'd shared, made the words come easier. "We were building a water treatment plant," Jim said, "supposed to serve 50,000 people. My team was installing the main pump when intelligence said there might be an IED nearby. I went to check the perimeter. When I was 50 yards away, the pump exploded, killed everyone." Bill set down the wrench he'd been cleaning. "You survived." "Yeah, and I've spent every day since wondering why." Bill looked at his son with an expression Jim couldn't quite read. "Maybe because you had something left to build." "I don't build anything anymore. I just break things. My marriage, my career, my relationship with my son." "You're building something right now." Bill gestured to the filtration system. "Learning this, carrying it forward, that's building." Jim wanted to believe that, wanted to think he could be someone who built instead of destroyed, who protected instead of abandoned. But the weight of his failures sat heavy. The second week brought a visitor that changed everything. Jim was working on the irrigation system's control valves when he heard a vehicle approach. Not Maria's familiar truck. Something newer, expensive sounding. A black SUV pulled into the yard, pristine and out of place among the ranch's worn equipment. A man emerged, tall and silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jim's truck. He walked with the confidence of someone used to ownership, his eyes cataloging everything as if already calculating worth. Bill emerged from the barn, and Jim saw his father's expression transform. Everything that had been opening up over the past 2 weeks slammed shut. This was the face of the man who'd left 34 years ago. Hard, guarded, dangerous. "Raymond," Bill said flatly. The man smiled without warmth. "Bill, you look terrible. Cancer treating you well?" Jim moved closer, standing beside his father. The visitor's eyes flicked to him with interest. "And who's this?" Raymond asked. "My son." Raymond's smile widened. "James, isn't it? Navy Seabee, decorated veteran, messy divorce, PTSD diagnosis. Currently in a custody battle." He extended his hand. "Raymond Cole, I knew your father a long time ago." Jim didn't shake the offered hand. Bill had told him about Cole, but seeing him in person was different. This was the man who'd stolen 40 years of his father's life, who'd threatened a child, who'd built an empire on theft and intimidation. "What do you want, Raymond?" Bill asked. Cole gestured to the land around them. "Heard you were dying, thought I'd pay my respects. Maybe discuss selling this place before it becomes an estate issue." "It's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price." Cole pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. "I'm prepared to offer $1.2 million. That's 10 times what this ranch is worth as agricultural land." Jim's engineer mind immediately flagged the discrepancy. Why would someone offer that much for a rundown ranch unless they knew something about what it contained? Bill's voice stayed level. "Not interested." Cole's expression hardened slightly. "Bill, be reasonable. You're dying. You have no heirs besides James here, who by all accounts is barely holding his own life together. This land will just be a burden. Sell it now. Make everyone's life easier." I said no. Cole turned to Jim. "Your father's been sitting on this land for 40 years, accomplishing nothing. Meanwhile, Clearwater Holdings provides clean water to 300 cities. We actually help people by charging them millions for systems that fail," Jim said quietly. "I've seen your work in Iraq. Half the treatment plants we built with Clearwater technology broke down within a year. Cole's eyes sharpened. Interesting. You have your father's paranoid streak. Makes sense given your PTSD. How's that custody battle going, by the way? By the time, the threat was subtle but clear. Jim felt his anger rising, the familiar red edge that preceded his episodes. But Bill's hand touched his arm, grounding him. Time for you to leave, Raymond, Bill said. Cole smiled again, pulling out a business card. My offer stands for 30 days. After that, I'll acquire this land through other means. He set the card on the porch railing. Nice seeing you again, Bill. James, good luck with your son. I hear 10-year-old boys need stable father figures. He drove away slowly, deliberately, kicking up dust that settled over everything. Jim's hands were shaking. Bill guided him to sit on the porch steps. That's who we're up against, Bill said quietly. A man who turns everything into leverage. He threatened Luke. He threatens everyone eventually. That's how he wins. Jim looked at his father. How do we beat him? Bill's expression was grim. Carefully. With evidence he can't deny and timing he can't counter. That's why I've waited so long. One mistake and he destroys everything. That night, Jim couldn't sleep. He paced his childhood room, mind racing with anger and fear, and something else. Something like purpose. Cole's visit had crystallized something in. This wasn't just about a filtration system or a 40-year-old patent dispute. It was about bullies who used power to crush anyone who threatened them. About fathers trying to protect their sons. About building something good enough to withstand attack. Around 3 a.m, Jim went to the barn and found his father there, as he knew he would. Bill was reviewing data, making notes, preparing, always preparing. Teach me everything, Jim said. Every detail, every backup system, every piece of evidence. I want to know it all. Bill looked up at his son. Why? Because Luke deserves better than a father who runs when things get hard. Because you deserve to see this finished before you die. Because Cole needs to lose. Bill studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair. Sit down. We have a lot of work to do. They worked through the night, Bill teaching, Jim learning, both men building towards something neither could fully see yet. Outside, the irrigation system flowed. The land held its secrets. And in San Diego, Luke Thornton slept peacefully, not knowing his father was finally learning how to fight. The third week began with rain. Not the gentle drizzle Jim remembered from childhood, but hard-driving sheets that turned the ranch roads to mud and made the irrigation channels roar with overflow. He stood at the kitchen window watching water carve new paths across the land, coffee cooling in his hands, thinking about Luke. His son had called last night with news that twisted Jim's stomach into knots. The custody hearing had been moved up. Derek's lawyer had filed an emergency motion citing Jim's extended absence and failure to respond to court documents. Carol had sounded tired on the phone, caught between protecting Luke and some part of her that still hoped Jim would figure himself out. You have 5 days, she'd said. 5 days to get back here and convince a judge you deserve to be a father. Bill emerged from his bedroom moving slower than usual, one hand pressed against his ribs where the cancer had spread. He poured coffee without speaking, sat at the table with the careful deliberation of someone managing pain. The oxygen tank he'd refused to use for weeks now sat beside his chair, tubes running to his nose. You look like hell, Jim said. Dying will do that. Bill sipped his coffee, grimaced. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Jim set down his cup, pulled out his phone, showed his father the court documents Carol had emailed. Emergency custody hearing. Derek Walsh petitioning for full parental rights. Jim's prolonged absence in Montana cited as evidence of abandonment and instability. I have to go back, Jim said. Fight for my son. Bill studied the documents, his engineer's mind processing information even as his body failed. 5 days until the hearing. 3 days to drive back. That gives you 2 days here. That's not enough time to learn everything. It's enough time to learn what matters. Bill stood with effort, walked to the window. The rain had eased to steady drizzle, gray light making everything look washed out and old. Come to the barn. There's something I need to show you before you go. They crossed the muddy yard, Bill moving carefully, Jim ready to catch him if he fell. Inside the barn, Bill led him past the main filtration system to a door Jim had assumed was a storage closet. Bill produced a key from his pocket, unlocked it, revealed stairs descending into darkness. Watch your step, Bill said, flicking on lights that illuminated a stairwell leading down into the earth. The basement was larger than the barn above it, carved out of bedrock and reinforced with concrete. Workshop tables lined the walls, covered with equipment Jim recognized from his military days. Water testing gear, soil analysis tools, ground-penetrating radar. And in the center of the room, arranged on a large table, were maps, dozens of them, geological surveys, water table diagrams, property deeds. Bill spread his hands over the maps like a general surveying a battlefield. This is what I've really been building for 40 years. Jim moved closer, studying the documents. The maps showed the aquifer beneath the ranch and extending under neighboring properties for miles. Red marks indicated specific locations, coordinates carefully noted in Bill's precise handwriting. "What are these marks?" Jim asked. "Cache points." Bill pulled out a leather journal, opened it to pages filled with technical diagrams and geographic data. "Over 4 decades, I've been hiding components throughout the property. Prototypes, test results, legal evidence. Everything needed to prove Cole stole our technology and build a case that can't be ignored. Why hide it? Why not keep it here?" Bill's expression was grim. "Because Cole has tried to get this property 3 times. Once with lawyers, once with fire, once with men who came in the night. Each time I stopped him, but barely. If everything was in one place, he could destroy it all at once. The fire." Jim remembered Maria mentioning it. "When?" 1987, 2 years after I faked my death. Barn burned to the foundation, lost 6 months of work. That's when I started distributing everything." Jim traced the map coordinates with his finger. "How many caches?" 12 major sites, another 20 smaller ones. Each contains different pieces, documentation, prototypes, water samples dating back decades. No single cache tells the whole story, but together they're irrefutable. "And you expect me to find them all?" Bill shook his head. "I expect you to find the ones that matter when the time comes." He pointed to a specific location on the map, coordinates that corresponded to somewhere near the creek on the southern boundary. "This one is first. Inside, you'll find something that will help with your custody case." Jim stared at his father. "What does a hidden cache have to do with Luke?" "Trust me." Bill folded the map, handed it to Jim. "Go there today. Bring back what you find, then we'll talk about the rest." The rain had stopped by the time Jim loaded a backpack with tools and headed south across the ranch. The land was transformed by water, everything green and alive despite the November cold. He followed the creek upstream, matching landmarks to Bill's map. An old cottonwood split by lightning, a rock formation that looked like a pointing finger, a fence post with 3 notches carved into it. The cache location was beneath an overhang where the creek had cut into a hillside. Jim had walked past this spot a dozen times in the past 2 weeks without noticing anything unusual. But now, looking carefully, he saw the signs. Rocks arranged too perfectly. Soil that had been disturbed and carefully replaced. He moved the rocks, dug down through 2 feet of earth, and struck something solid, a metal case, military grade, sealed against water and time. He pulled it free, brushed off the mud, found it locked with a combination dial. His phone buzzed, a text from Bill containing only 4 numbers. Jim entered them, heard the lock click. Inside the case was a smaller waterproof box and a letter addressed to him in his father's handwriting. "James," the letter began, "if you're reading this, you've started to understand what I've been protecting. The box contains evidence that will help your custody case. But more importantly, it contains truth. Truth about why I left. Truth about who threatened you. Truth about what I've been fighting for all these years. Use it wisely. Your father." Jim opened the inner box. Inside were photographs, documents, and a USB drive. The photographs showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing outside an elementary school. It took Jim a moment to recognize himself. There were dozens of images, all from the same time period, all clearly surveillance photos. The documents were medical records from 1980, his elementary school's health department, reports of a mysterious illness that had affected 37 students over a 3-month period. Headaches, nausea, cognitive difficulties. The symptoms had eventually faded, no cause ever determined, the incident written off as a flu outbreak. But attached to the medical records was a water quality report from the school's supply, dated 2 weeks before the illness began. The report showed elevated levels of industrial solvents, heavy metals, compounds that shouldn't exist in drinking water, and stamped at the bottom was a company name, Clearwater Holdings, Water Systems Division. Jim's hands shook as he read. He'd been one of those sick kids. He remembered missing weeks of school, his mother worried, doctors unable to explain what was wrong. And then it had passed, faded into childhood memory, another mystery of growing up. Except it hadn't been mysterious. It had been deliberate. The USB drive contained more. Audio files, video footage. Jim didn't have a laptop to review them, but Bill's notes said they were recordings of Cole's men discussing the school contamination, planning it, executing it, using children as leverage against a man who wouldn't surrender his patent rights. Jim sat beside the creek, rain beginning again, and understood with crystal clarity why his father had left. Not out of cowardice, not out of selfishness, but because staying would have meant watching his son die slowly from poisoned water. Bill had made an impossible choice, and it had cost him everything except Jim's life. The walk back to the ranch felt longer than the walk out. Jim's mind churned with rage and grief and a terrible understanding. He'd spent 34 years hating his father for abandonment, never knowing the abandonment was sacrifice, never knowing Cole had been willing to kill children to protect his stolen technology. Bill was in the barn when Jim returned, working on the filtration system despite his obvious exhaustion. He looked up as Jim entered, saw the expression on his son's face, and nodded slowly. "You found it." Jim set the case on the workbench. "You let me believe you were dead so I wouldn't be poisoned like those other kids." That was part of it. Bill's voice was steady, matter of fact. Cole made it clear. "Disappear or watch you die. I chose to disappear. You could have fought, gone to the authorities, the press. I tried." Bill pulled out another journal, this one filled with copies of police reports, letters to EPA officials, attempts to reach journalists. Every door was closed. Cole had connections everywhere. Local police, state investigators, federal agencies. Anyone who showed interest suddenly got transferred or discredited. "So you gave up." Bill's eyes hardened. "I never gave up. I changed tactics. Fighting Cole openly was suicide. But building something he couldn't touch, collecting evidence he didn't know existed, that was war on my terms." Jim thought about his own battles, the fights with Carol, the incident at work, the rage that erupted at the wrong times against the wrong people. He'd been fighting too, but fighting blindly, lashing out without strategy or purpose. "The custody hearing," Jim said. "If I show this evidence, if I prove Cole poisoned children, including me, does that help my case?" Bill was quiet for a long moment. "It proves you come from a family that fights powerful enemies, that you have PTSD, not just from Iraq, but from being poisoned as a child, that your anger has a source beyond your control. That sounds like it makes me look worse. Or it makes you look like a survivor, someone who's been fighting his whole life without knowing what he was fighting against." Bill met his son's eyes. "The question is whether you want to use this evidence now or save it for a bigger battle later." Jim understood the choice. Use the evidence to win custody, but expose Bill's entire operation before it was ready. Risk everything for his son, or trust that he could win custody without revealing the larger truth. "What would you do?" Jim asked. Bill's answer came without hesitation. "I'd protect my son. Everything else is secondary. Even if it means Cole wins." Cole's been winning for 40 years. A few more months won't change that. Bill pulled himself up straighter, fighting pain and exhaustion. "But Jim, if you use this evidence, you can never take it back. Cole will know we have more. He'll come after both of us harder than before, and he'll go after Luke." The words hung in the barn's dusty air. Jim looked at the filtration system, at his father's life work, at the maps showing cache locations across 400 acres. 40 years of preparation, 40 years of patience. All of it at risk if Jim revealed too much too soon. "I need to think," Jim said. "You have 3 days." Bill's voice was getting weaker. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it. You're his father. You get to make the hard choices now." That night, Jim sat on the porch with his phone, staring at Carol's number. He needed to call her, needed to tell her he was coming back, needed to prepare for the custody hearing. But first he needed to decide what kind of fight he was willing to have. The door creaked. Maria Santos appeared carrying a thermos and 2 cups. She sat beside him without asking, poured coffee that steamed in the cold air. "Bill told me what you found," she said. Jim accepted the coffee. "Did you know? About the school?" Maria nodded. "I helped him get the evidence. Took me 6 months to find a water quality inspector willing to test samples anonymously. Another year to track down the workers who'd contaminated the supply. You've been part of this the whole time. 40 years. Maria stared out at the dark land. Bill needed someone he could trust. Someone Cole couldn't threaten because I had nothing Cole wanted. No husband, no children, just an old teacher who knew how to keep secrets. Why help him? What's in it for you? Maria smiled softly. When you teach for 35 years, you see what matters. I taught Bill's son, watched him grow up without a father, saw the damage that did. She turned to Jim. But I also saw a boy who was alive, who got to grow up, go to college, join the military, have a son of his own. Bill gave you that by leaving. I would have rather had a father. Would you rather be dead? The question silenced Jim. He thought about Luke, about the choice he was facing. Protect his son by fighting for custody now, or protect his son by finishing what Bill started and taking down Cole permanently. There's a third option, Maria said, reading his thoughts. You can do both. Fight for Luke now with what you have. Be the father he needs day by day. And when the time comes, when Bill's evidence is complete and the case is unbeatable, then you finish the larger fight. I'm not good at patience. Neither was your father at your age. Maria stood, left the thermos. But he learned. And now he's dying with the satisfaction of knowing his son is alive and his work will continue. That's a legacy worth building slowly. After Maria left, Jim made the call. Carol answered on the second ring, her voice tense with worry and frustration. I'm coming back, Jim said. I'll be there for the hearing. Where have you been? Learning about my father, about where I come from, about why I am the way I am. That sounds like therapy speak. It's truth. Jim watched rain begin again, soft and steady. Carol, there are things about my childhood I never told you, things that explain some of my issues. The court doesn't care about explanations. They care about stability. I know. That's why I'm coming back. To prove I can be stable. To fight for our son. Carol was quiet for a moment. Derek showed me something today. Video from a bar fight in Montana 3 nights ago. Man matching your description broke someone's arm. Jim's stomach dropped. That wasn't me. The video quality is poor, but Derek's convinced. He's adding it to his evidence file. Jim understood immediately. Cole had staged it, set up a fight, used someone who looked like Jim, made sure it was recorded and delivered to Derek. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. It's a setup, Jim said. I've been at my father's ranch for 2 weeks. I have witnesses. Your father who's supposedly been dead for 30 years? Carol's voice carried skepticism. Jim, this isn't helping your case. I'll explain everything at the hearing. Just trust me for 5 more days. I want to trust you. Carol's voice broke slightly, but you keep making it so hard. After the call ended, Jim sat in the darkness thinking about trust and evidence and the difference between truth and proof. He knew he hadn't been in any bar fight, but Derek had video. Cole had resources, and a judge would believe what they could see over what Jim could claim. Bill appeared in the doorway, oxygen tank trailing behind him. Heard you on the phone. Derek's already making moves. Cole set me up. Bar fight I wasn't in, video evidence I can't refute. Bill lowered himself into the chair Maria had vacated. Old trick. Cole used it against me during the patent trial. Suddenly, witnesses appeared claiming that I'd threatened them. Photos of me at places I'd never been. He has people who specialize in this. How did you fight it? I didn't. Bill's admission was quiet. I had no resources for investigators or expert witnesses. He buried me in false evidence while hiding the truth. I lost everything because I couldn't prove what really happened. Jim felt the weight of history repeating. But you had truth on your side. Truth without proof is just opinion. That's why I spent 40 years collecting evidence that can't be faked. Water samples with certified chain of custody, photographs with timestamp verification, recordings with voice analysis. When we finally expose Cole, it has to be airtight. We might not have 40 years. Then we work with what we have. Bill pulled out his journal, opened to pages filled with names and locations. There's someone who can help with your custody case. Someone who knows Cole's methods and has been waiting for a chance to hurt him. Who? Derek Walsh. Jim stared at his father. My ex-wife's husband, the man trying to take my son. Bill tapped an entry in his journal. Derek Walsh, sheriff's deputy. Wife died of cancer 4 years ago. Contaminated water from a clear water holding system that had been failing for months. Company covered it up, settled quietly. Wife died anyway. Derek's been investigating Cole ever since. He's working with Cole. He delivered that video. He's pretending to work with Cole. Bill showed Jim a photograph, grainy but clear enough. Derek Walsh meeting with an EPA investigator in a parking lot 6 months ago, getting paid for information. Your stepfather is undercover, Jim, and he's been building a case against Cole for years. The revelation shifted everything. Jim had assumed Derek was the enemy, another obstacle between him and his son. But if Bill was right, Derek was an ally, maybe the most important ally they had. How do you know this? Maria has connections, former students in government agencies, people who trust her. She'd heard about an investigation into Clearwater Holdings and did some digging. Derek Walsh's name came up. We've been monitoring him ever since. Does Carol know? Bill shook his head. Derek's deep undercover. Can't risk anyone knowing, even family. But if you approach him right, if you show him you understand what he's really doing, he might help you instead of hurting you. Or he might arrest me for interfering with an investigation. That's the risk. Bill closed his journal. But right now, you need all the help you can get. And Derek needs evidence that goes deeper than what he's found so far. You could give him that. Jim thought about it through the night, about trust and risk and the strange alliances that form when fighting powerful enemies. About Derek raising Luke, being the steady presence Jim couldn't be, maybe doing it not just out of love for Carol, but out of revenge against the man who'd killed his first wife. The next morning brought clear skies and hard frost. Jim loaded his truck with the essentials he'd need for the drive back to San Diego. Bill watched from the porch, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. What's that? Jim asked. Insurance. Bill handed him the package. Inside, you'll find a USB drive with copies of everything in the Southern Cache. Documents proving Cole poisoned your school. Audio recordings of his men planning it. Enough to destroy his credibility if used correctly. I thought you said to wait. I said to choose your battles. This is ammunition if you need it. But use it wisely. Once it's public, there's no going back. Jim tucked the package into his truck. What if the custody hearing goes badly? What if Derek's evidence convinces the judge? Then you appeal. You fight. You don't give up. Bill's voice was firm despite his physical weakness. Luke needs a father who keeps showing up even when it's hard. That's the real test. Not whether you win or lose, but whether you keep trying. Jim embraced his father for the first time since arriving at the ranch. Bill's body was thin and fragile, but his grip was strong. They held each other for a long moment, 3 decades of separation compressing into that single point of contact. Thank you, Jim said, for protecting me, for building all this, for not giving up. Thank you for coming back. Bill stepped away, wiping his eyes. Now go get your son. The drive south felt different than the drive north had. Jim wasn't running from anything now. He was driving toward something, toward Luke, toward a fight he finally understood, toward becoming the kind of father his own father had tried to be, the kind who protected even when protection looked like absence. He stopped in Hollowbrook for Brown. The same kid was working the counter, eyes sharpening with recognition. You're still around, the kid observed. Heading out today. Jim paid for fuel and coffee. You know Derek Walsh? The deputy? Sure, comes through here sometimes, asking questions about old Bill's ranch. Seems real interested in the property. What kind of questions? Water rights, land surveys, who owns what? The kid bagged Jim's coffee. Some folks think he's planning to buy it after Bill dies. Others think he's investigating something. What do you think? The kid shrugged. I think anyone interested in that ranch is looking for something valuable. Question is whether they find it before someone else does. Jim drove away thinking about that, about everyone looking for what Bill had hidden, Cole wanting to bury it, Derek wanting to use it as evidence, Jim himself learning to protect it, and somewhere in the middle, a dying man's legacy waiting to be claimed by whoever had the courage to bring it to light. He made San Diego in 2 days of hard driving, arrived at Carol's house late on a Thursday evening. The house was dark except for one light upstairs, Luke's room. Jim sat in his truck across the street, watching his son's shadow move behind curtains, and felt the weight of everything at stake. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Murphy's Diner tomorrow 6 a.m. Come alone. Derek. Jim stared at the message. This was it. The moment to decide if he believed his father's intelligence, if he trusted that Derek was an ally instead of an enemy, if he was willing to risk everything on the hope that someone else was fighting the same battle from a different angle. He texted back, I'll be there. That night, sleeping in his truck because he couldn't afford a motel, Jim dreamed of water. Clean and clear, flowing through systems his father had built, reaching people who needed it, healing instead of poisoning. He dreamed of Luke learning to build things, carrying forward a legacy he didn't know existed yet. And he dreamed of Bill, working alone in a barn for 40 years, never giving up, never surrendering, building something that would outlast them all. Murphy's Diner was the kind of place that served coffee in thick ceramic mugs and made hash browns on a griddle older than Jim. He arrived early, took a booth in the back, positioned himself where he could see both entrances. Old habits from places where positioning meant survival. Derek Walsh entered at exactly 6, scanning the room with practiced efficiency before approaching Jim's booth. He was taller than Jim expected, fit in the way of someone who worked at it, dressed in civilian clothes but moving with the awareness of law enforcement. He slid into the booth across from Jim, ordered coffee from a waitress who clearly knew him, waited until she was gone before speaking. "You're either very brave or very stupid coming back to California," Derek said. Jim met his eyes. "Depends on whether you're trying to help me or bury me." Derek smiled without humor. "Fair question. Why would I help the man married to my wife? Ex-wife. And because we're fighting the same enemy." Derek's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest. Calculation. What enemy would that be? Raymond Cole. Clearwater Holdings. The man who's been poisoning people for profit for 40 years. Jim kept his voice low. The man who killed your first wife with contaminated water and covered it up. The flicker became a flame. Derek leaned forward slightly. "You need to be very careful what you say next. My father is William Thornton. Bill Thornton, the engineer whose patent Cole stole in 1982. Jim pulled out his phone, showed Derek a photograph of the documents from the Southern cache. "This is proof Cole deliberately contaminated my elementary school's water supply in 1980 to force my father to stop fighting the patent case." Derek studied the image. If that's real, it's federal crimes, conspiracy, attempted murder of minors, environmental terrorism. It's real, and it's just the beginning. Bill has 40 years of evidence, locations across 400 acres, documentation of every system failure, every cover-up, every life Cole destroyed building his empire. Derek sat back, processing. "Why come to me?" "Because you've been investigating Cole for 4 years. Because you know his methods. Because you need evidence that goes deeper than maintenance records and settlement agreements." Jim leaned forward. "And because I need help winning custody of my son so I can finish what my father started." "You think I'm going to help you take Luke from Carol?" "I think you know I'm not the real threat to Luke. Cole is. If he finds out what Bill has hidden, he'll do whatever it takes to destroy it. And he's already proven he's willing to hurt children." Derek was quiet for a long moment. The waitress refilled their coffee. Outside, morning traffic began to build. Finally, Derek spoke. 4 years ago, my wife started getting sick. Headaches, nausea, cognitive issues. Doctors couldn't figure it out. By the time they diagnosed the cancer, it was stage 4. She died 6 months later. I'm sorry. After she died, I started asking questions. Our water came from a Clearwater system. New installation, supposed to be state-of-the-art. I got the medical examiner to test her tissue samples. Heavy metal poisoning, industrial solvents, compounds that shouldn't exist in drinking water. Jim waited, letting Derek tell it. I went to Clearwater. They stonewalled me. Went to the EPA. They said the system met all regulations. Went to local law enforcement. Nobody wanted to touch it. That's when I realized Cole had protection at every level. So you went undercover. I transferred to Carol's jurisdiction, started building relationships, became the kind of deputy Cole's people would trust, married a woman I genuinely loved because it gave me cover and because she deserved better than living alone. And I've been collecting evidence piece by piece for 4 years. What do you have? Maintenance records showing systematic failures, settlement agreements with NDAs, names of engineers who were fired for reporting problems. Derek pulled out a thin folder, slid it across the table. Enough to make Cole uncomfortable. Not enough to put him in prison. What do you need? Proof of intent. Evidence that Cole knew his systems were failing and covered it up anyway. Better yet, proof he deliberately contaminated supplies to achieve business objectives. Derek tapped the photo on Jim's phone. What you're showing me, if it's verifiable, that's the kind of evidence that ends careers and starts prison sentences. Jim made a decision, pulled up more photos, the water quality reports, the medical records, the surveillance photos of children, everything from the Southern cache. Derek studied each image carefully, his expression growing harder. Where's the physical evidence? Secure location. Multiple backups. Bill spent 40 years making sure it couldn't be destroyed or dismissed. I need to see the originals. Test chain of custody. Verify authenticity. You need to help me win custody first. Jim's voice was firm. Then I'll give you everything, but I'm not risking my father's life work until I know Luke is safe. Derek considered this. The custody hearing is in 2 days, Judge Morrison presiding. She's tough but fair, doesn't like games. Will she believe the bar fight video is fake? If I testify it's fake. If I present evidence that Cole staged it. Derek pulled out his own phone, showed Jim footage from a different angle. Same bar, same fight. But this version showed the attacker's face clearly. Not Jim, someone who looked similar in the grainy first video, but definitely not the same person. You've had this the whole time? I've had it for 3 days, since Cole's people delivered the original to me. They thought I'd use it to bury you. Instead, I documented how it was delivered, who delivered it, and started tracing it back to source. Why help me? Derek's expression was complicated. Because Carol loves Luke more than anything. And Luke needs his father, not the broken version who scares him, the version who's learning to heal, the version who's fighting for something bigger than himself. She told me you went to Montana to deal with family issues. I'm betting you came back different. Jim thought about the past 2 weeks, the work with Bill, the understanding of why his father had left, the purpose he'd found in learning the filtration systems, the clarity about what mattered. I came back knowing who I'm fighting and why, Jim said. That make me different enough? We'll find out in 2 days. Derek stood, dropped cash on the table for his coffee. Show up on time. Wear clean clothes. Don't lose your temper, no matter what Cole's lawyer says. And trust that some of us are on your side even when it doesn't look like it. After Derek left, Jim sat finishing his coffee and thinking about allies and enemies and how sometimes they wore the same face until the moment of truth. His phone buzzed, a text from Luke. Dad, are you home? Mom said you're back. Can I see you? Jim's hands shook slightly as he typed. Tomorrow, buddy, we'll spend the whole day together before the hearing, I promise. 3 dots, appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I missed you. Jim stared at those 3 words, feeling something crack open in his chest. The kind of crack that lets light in instead of bleeding darkness out. He typed back. I missed you too, more than you know. He spent the rest of the day preparing. Got a haircut, bought clean clothes that fit, reviewed the custody documents, made notes about what to say and what not to say, practiced staying calm, breathing slowly, controlling the anger that lives so close to his surface. That evening, Carol agreed to let him take Luke for dinner. They met at a family restaurant, the kind with crayons on the table and pictures on the menu. Luke came in looking smaller than Jim remembered, more cautious, his eyes checking Jim's face for signs of danger. Jim kept his movements slow and predictable. Let Luke choose where to sit, what to order, what to talk about. They started with safe topics, school, friends, a science project about water cycles that made Jim smile because, of course, his son had chosen water. As Luke talked, some of his caution faded. He showed Jim drawings he'd made, explained how rain became rivers, became oceans, became rain again. His hands moved with animation, his voice gaining confidence, and Jim saw glimpses of the boy Luke could be when he wasn't afraid. I learned about water too, Jim said. From your grandfather. Did Mom tell you I went to see him? She said he's been alive this whole time. Luke's voice was quiet. Why did he pretend to be dead? Jim thought about how to explain this to a 10-year-old. To protect me. There was a bad man who wanted to hurt our family. Grandpa left so the bad man would leave me alone. That's sad. Yeah, but it worked. I got to grow up, go to school, join the military. Have you? Jim reached across the table, laid his hand palm up. Luke stared at it for a long moment, then slowly placed his own hand in his father's. I'm sorry I scared you, buddy. I'm sorry I've been so angry and messed up. I'm working on being better. Is that why you went to Montana? Partly. Also to learn from Grandpa before he dies. He's teaching me how to build things that help people. Jim squeezed Luke's hand gently, like water systems that make dirty water clean. Can I learn too? Someday, yeah. When you're older, when it's safe. They talked through dinner about Montana and the ranch and the filtration system. Jim kept it simple, didn't mention coal or the custody battle or the larger war being waged. Just shared stories about working with Bill, learning engineering, fixing broken things and making them whole again. As they left the restaurant, Luke hugged him. Jim held his son carefully, feeling the fragility and strength in that small body, understanding with perfect clarity what Bill had felt 34 years ago. The willingness to sacrifice everything, even your child's love, to keep them safe. "I'll see you after the hearing," Jim said. "And then we're gonna figure out how to make this work. You and me and Mom and Derek. We're all gonna figure it out together." Luke nodded against Jim's chest. "Okay, Dad." The custody hearing took place in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. Judge Morrison presided from a bench that made her look imposing despite her small stature. She reviewed documents with the careful attention of someone who understood lives hung on her decisions. Derek testified first, explaining the bar fight video and how it had been staged. He presented his own footage, expert analysis of the two videos showing they depicted different people, and testimony about Cole's history of manufacturing evidence. Carol's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Derek's credentials and documentation were solid. Carol testified next, her emotions raw and honest. She loved Jim once. She loved Luke always. She wanted their son to have a father, but needed to know that father was stable and safe. She talked about the good years and the bad years, and the terror of watching someone she cared about spiral into darkness. Then it was Jim's turn. He walked to the stand, feeling every eye in the courtroom on him, answered questions about his military service, his PTSD, the incident at work, the trip to Montana. He told the truth carefully, explaining without excusing, owning his failures while showing he understood them now. Cole's lawyer went after him hard, painted him as unstable, violent, a danger to himself and others. Brought up the bar fight video again, implied Derek's testimony was biased. Suggested Jim's extended absence proved he didn't prioritize his son. Jim kept his breathing steady, counted backwards from 10 when anger rose. Remembered Bill working alone for 40 years, never giving up, never surrendering. And he answered each attack calmly, honestly, showing the judge not a perfect man, but one who was trying to become better. The judge called a recess. Jim sat with Derek and Carol in the hallway, the three of them an unlikely alliance bound by love for the same child. "You did good in there," Derek said quietly. "Stayed calm, that matters." Carol touched Jim's arm. "I meant what I said, about wanting Luke to have you in his life. I just need to know he's safe." "He will be," Jim promised. "Whatever the judge decides, I'll make sure he's safe." When court reconvened, Judge Morrison delivered her ruling. Joint custody, 50% time with each parent. Jim would have weekends and alternating weeks, with restrictions on overnight visits until he completed 6 months of consistent therapy. It wasn't everything Jim had hoped for, but it wasn't nothing. It was a chance, an opportunity to prove himself day by day, decision by decision, showing up over and over until Luke learned to trust him again. Outside the courthouse, Luke ran to him. Jim picked up his son, held him tight, felt tears he didn't try to hide. "We did it, buddy. We get to be together." Luke nodded, arms wrapped around Jim's neck. "Can I visit Grandpa someday, before he dies?" Jim looked at Carol, saw her nod slowly. Yeah, I think we can make that happen." That night, Jim called Bill from a motel room. His father answered on the 5th ring, voice weak but alert. "I got joint custody," Jim said. "It's not perfect, but it's a start. Perfect is the enemy of good." Bill's approval came through clear. "You fought, and you won something worth having. That's what matters." Derek helped. "He's been investigating Cole for 4 years. He wants the evidence." Bill was quiet for a moment. "Do you trust him?" "I think so. He's been building a case the same way you have. Patient, careful. He just needs proof of intent. Then give it to him. Not everything, not yet, but enough to show we're serious. Enough to make him invested in protecting what we've built. I'll be back in Montana next weekend, bringing Luke if Carol agrees." Bill's voice broke slightly. "I'd like that. I'd like to meet my grandson before I go." "You're not going anywhere yet, old man." Bill laughed, a sound Jim hadn't heard before. Dry and rough, but genuine. "We'll see. The cancer has other ideas. But I'm stubborn, might stick around a bit longer just to be difficult." After the call, Jim lay in the dark thinking about what came next. About teaching Luke the things Bill had taught him. About working with Derek to expose Cole. About finishing what his father started while building something new with his son. The land remembered, Maria had said, and Jim was beginning to understand what she meant. The land held secrets. The water carried truth. And patient men who built slowly and carefully could change the world in ways that looked like failure until suddenly they looked like victory. He fell asleep thinking about Montana, about clean water flowing through systems designed to heal instead of harm, about a dying man's legacy waiting for strong hands to carry it forward, about a father and son learning to build together, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of trust at a time. The war with coal was just beginning, but for the first time in years, Jim felt ready to fight it. The drive back to Montana felt different this time. Jim's truck carried more than just him and a duffel bag of clothes. It carried Luke, 10 years old and silent in the passenger seat, watching California fade into Nevada through a window smudged with his fingerprints. Carol had agreed to the visit after the custody hearing, 2 weeks at the ranch before school started again. A chance for father and son to build something beyond scheduled phone calls and supervised visits. Luke had been quiet since they left San Diego. Not the comfortable quiet of people at ease with silence, but the loaded quiet of words trapped behind teeth. He clutched his tablet even though the signal had died an hour ago, thumb moving across a dark screen out of habit or need for something familiar to hold. "You doing okay, buddy?" Jim asked, breaking an hour of highway hum. "Yeah." The word came flat, no conviction behind it. Jim recognized the tone. He'd used it himself in therapy sessions when Dr. Patterson asked how he was feeling, and the real answer was too complicated to excavate. "We'll stop for lunch soon. Thought we could hit that diner I told you about. The one with the pie Grandpa used to take me to when I was your age." Luke nodded without looking away from the window. Jim let it go, understanding that some silences needed space to breathe before they could speak. They crossed into Idaho as afternoon stretched toward evening, stopped at a roadside diner that hadn't changed since Jim was Luke's age. Red vinyl booths, checkerboard floor, a waitress who looked like she'd been pouring coffee since the place opened. Jim ordered pie and coffee. Luke asked for water and picked at a burger that gradually went cold. Halfway through the meal, Luke spoke. "Does Derek know I'm here?" "Yeah. He helped convince your mom it was a good idea." Luke processed this, fork pushing fries into geometric patterns. "Is he mad I'm gone?" "Derek's not mad. He wants what's best for you. Same as your mom, same as me. What if what's best is different for all of you?" The question was older than 10 years should allow. Jim set down his coffee, gave his son full attention. "Then we talk about it. Figure it out together. Nobody gets to decide alone what's best for you, except eventually you." Luke looked up, making eye contact for the first time since San Diego. "Mom says you're different now. Less angry." "I'm working on it." Jim chose honesty over comfort. "The anger's still there, but I'm learning to use it for building instead of breaking." "How do you do that?" "Find something that matters more than being angry. For me, that's you, and what Grandpa built, and making sure people have clean water." Luke returned to his fries, but something had shifted. The silence that followed felt less loaded, more like two people thinking rather than one person withdrawing. They reached the ranch after dark, headlights sweeping across buildings that looked different to Jim now. Not abandoned, but waiting. The barn loomed solid against star-scattered sky. The house showed light in the kitchen window where Bill would be having his evening coffee, timing precise as always. Jim killed the engine. Luke sat looking at the house with an expression Jim couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or the weight of expectations, or just exhaustion from 10 hours in a truck. "Ready to meet your grandfather? What if he doesn't like me?" "He's gonna love you," Jim squeezed Luke's shoulder. "You're his grandson. That's all that matters." Bill was on the porch before they reached the steps, thinner than Jim remembered from 2 weeks ago, moving slower, the oxygen tank a new addition rolling behind him on a small cart. But his eyes were clear and sharp, fixed on Luke with an intensity that made the boy stop halfway up the stairs. "So you're Luke." Bill's voice was rough as old leather but warm underneath. "Your dad's told me a lot about you." Luke looked at Jim, seeking permission or rescue. Jim nodded encouragement. Luke climbed the remaining steps, stood before his grandfather with the uncertain posture of someone meeting royalty or judgment. Bill extended his hand. Luke shook it, small fingers disappearing in weathered calluses. "You look like your grandmother," Bill said. "She had those same eyes, smart eyes that see more than they tell." "I never met her." "I know. She died before you were born, but she would have loved you." Bill released Luke's hand. "Come inside, there's food, and I want to show you something." The kitchen was exactly as Jim remembered. Everything in its place with military precision. Bill had prepared sandwiches, sliced them diagonal the way kids preferred, set out milk and cookies that looked store-bought, but turned out to be Maria's homemade recipe. They ate without much conversation, Luke venturing occasional glances at his grandfather, Bill studying his grandson with a cataloging attention that missed nothing. Jim watched both of them, seeing his own features reflected across generations. The set of the jaw, the way their hands moved, the silence that felt comfortable rather than empty. After dinner, Bill led them to the barn. Luke's eyes widened as they entered, taking in the transformed interior. The workshop benches, the filtration system, the walls covered with diagrams and charts. He moved toward the central tank as if drawn magnetically, reached out to touch it, pulled back, looked at Bill for permission. Go ahead. Bill nodded. It's built to be touched, to be understood. Luke laid his palm against the metal, feeling the slight vibration of water moving through the system. What does it do? Cleans water. Bill moved beside him, began explaining in terms simple enough for a child but detailed enough to respect intelligence. See these layers? Each one removes different contaminants. Bacteria here, heavy metals there. Even pharmaceutical residue gets filtered out. Without electricity, the bacteria do the work. They eat the bad stuff. We just give them the right environment and they handle the rest. Luke circled the system, absorbing details, asking questions that showed he'd been paying attention to everything Jim had told him. How fast does it work? How long do the bacteria live? What happens if it breaks? Can you make it bigger or smaller? Bill answered each question patiently, his teaching style different from Jim's. Where Jim explained the how, Bill explained the why. Not just the mechanism, but the purpose behind it. Not just the science, but the impact. An hour passed before Bill called a halt. It's late. Luke needs sleep. We'll have weeks to learn the rest. They settled Luke into the upstairs bedroom, the same one Jim had slept in as a child. Bill had prepared it carefully. Clean sheets, a lamp on the nightstand, books about water systems and engineering written for young readers. Luke sat on the bed testing the springs, looking around at a room that held his father's childhood like a museum. This was really your room, Dad? Yeah, Jim sat beside him. I built those model airplanes on the desk. Threw a baseball through that window when I was 9. Your age. Did Grandpa get mad? He made me earn money to replace it. Doing chores around the ranch all summer. But he wasn't angry. He said breaking things is part of learning what they're made of. Luke ran his hand over the faded bedspread. I break things sometimes. Everyone does. No, Luke's voice dropped. I mean, I break things on purpose. When I get mad. Jim's chest tightened. What kind of things? My tablet. I threw it at the wall last month. Derek fixed it, but the screen's still cracked. And I punched a hole in my closet door. Mom thinks I did it by accident, but I didn't. The confession hung between them. Jim recognized the shame in his son's voice, the fear of being judged for impulses he couldn't control. He'd felt the same thing after his own episodes, the horror of watching himself act and being unable to stop. Why were you mad? Luke shrugged, the universal gesture of not knowing or not wanting to say. Sometimes I just get this feeling, like everything's too tight, like I need to break something or I'll break instead. Jim pulled Luke close, feeling the small body tense, then relax against him. That feeling has a name. It's called rage, and I get it too. You do? All the time. It's part of why your mom and I got divorced, why I've had trouble at work, why I scare you sometimes. Luke pulled back to look at his father's eyes. You don't scare me anymore. That's because I'm learning to handle it better. And you can too. Jim tapped Luke's chest where the heart was. It doesn't go away, but you can teach it to be useful instead of destructive. How? We'll figure that out together, starting tomorrow. After Luke fell asleep, Jim found Bill on the porch with coffee and the kind of night that made you feel small and grateful simultaneously. He sat in the chair beside his father, accepted the cup poured without asking. The boys got it, Bill said without preamble. The anger. Jim nodded. He told me. Throwing things, punching walls. How old were you when it started? 7, 8, after you left. Jim paused. I always thought it was because of you, because I was mad you abandoned us. Bill sipped his coffee, considering. Maybe partly, but I had it too. Started when I came back from Vietnam. Your mother helped me manage it, gave me purpose, something to build. You think that's genetic or learned? Bill looked at his son. Does it matter? Either way, Luke has it. Question is what we do about it. Teach him what you taught me. Channel it into work, into building. That's part of it. Bill set down his cup. But there's more. The anger comes from somewhere. For me, it was war. For you, it was abandonment and combat. For Luke, it's watching his family break apart, seeing his father struggle, living between two houses with two different versions of normal. So what do? We give him tools, teach him to recognize the warning signs, show him how to redirect before it takes control. Bill gestured toward the barn, and we give him something worth being angry about. Real injustice he can fight instead of imaginary enemies. He's 10 years old. I was teaching you to weld at 6. Bill's voice was firm. Don't underestimate him because he's young. Involve him. Let him help. Give him agency over something that matters. The next morning began early, Luke waking to the sound of Jim and Bill working in the barn. He appeared in the doorway still in pajamas, hair sticking up, eyes puffy with sleep, but curious. What are you doing? Testing a new configuration. Bill gestured to a section of the filtration system they'd modified overnight. Want to help? Luke nodded, disappeared to change clothes, returned in jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days. Bill handed him safety goggles and showed him how to read the water quality meters, explaining what each number meant and why it mattered. They worked through breakfast, Maria appearing with food they ate standing up, too focused to sit. Luke asked constant questions, soaking up information like the filters absorb contaminants. His hands learned the feel of pipes and fittings. His eyes tracked water through clear tubes, watching the cloudy become clear. Around noon, Bill called a break. They walked the property, Bill showing Luke the irrigation system, explaining how it connected to the filtration setup, demonstrating decades of integrated design. Luke ran ahead sometimes, exploring, coming back with rocks or interesting plants, asking what they were and how they fit into the ecosystem. At the southern boundary, they reached the cache location where Jim had found evidence of the school contamination. Bill knelt beside the creek, joints protesting, and pointed to marks in the bank. See these erosion patterns? Waters have been flowing here for thousands of years, carving the land, shaping it, patient as death and strong as anything man can build. Luke crouched beside him. Is that why you picked water to work with? Water's everything. Bill scooped a handful, let it run through his fingers. It's life, but it's also a weapon when used wrong. The man I told you about, Raymond Cole, he turns water into poison for profit, makes people sick so they'll buy his expensive systems. That's mean. That's evil. Bill stood with effort. And that's why what we're building here matters. We're making sure people can have clean water without paying someone like Cole. Luke looked at the creek, then at his grandfather. Can I help? Really help, not just watch? Bill exchanged a look with Jim. That's why you're here. They spent the afternoon on a project Bill had designed specifically for Luke. A small-scale filtration system, simple enough for a child to build, but functional enough to actually clean water. Bill provided materials and guidance. Jim offered hands when needed. But Luke did the work, following instructions, making mistakes, learning to fix them. The concentration on his face reminded Jim of himself at that age, before anger became his defining trait. The care Luke took with each step showed the intelligence Carol always praised and the determination that was pure Thornton genetics. But halfway through, something went wrong. A pipe wouldn't fit properly. Luke forced it, trying to make stubborn materials obey his will. The fitting cracked. Water leaked everywhere, and Luke's face transformed from concentration to fury so fast Jim barely had time to react. Luke threw the broken fitting across the barn, grabbed a wrench, raised it to smash the entire system. Jim caught his wrist mid-swing, firm but gentle, holding the anger at bay with physical presence. Stop! Jim's voice was calm. Breathe. It's broken! Luke's voice cracked with frustration and shame. I ruined it. No, you learned something doesn't work. That's different from ruining it. Bill appeared beside them, moving faster than Jim thought possible given his condition. He picked up the broken fitting, examined it, nodded as if confirming a hypothesis. This fitting was cracked already. See this hairline fracture? Not your fault. Would have broken regardless of how careful you were. Luke's anger deflated as quickly as it had risen, leaving him shaking and small. I thought I messed it up. You got angry because you thought you failed. Bill's voice carried no judgment. I've broken more things out of anger than I care to count. Your father has too. It's what we do when we're frustrated and don't have better tools for handling it. What are the better tools? Recognition, breathing, stepping away before the anger takes control. Bill held out the broken fitting, but also understanding that some things break through no fault of our own, accepting that failure is information, not identity. Jim released Luke's wrist. The boy set down the wrench carefully, stepped back from the project, visibly working to calm himself. His breathing slowed, his fists unclenched. The process took maybe 2 minutes that felt much longer. Better? Jim asked. Luke nodded. Sorry, I almost broke it. You didn't almost. You stopped yourself. That's progress. They replaced the cracked fitting, completed the small filtration system as evening approached. When Luke turned the valve and water flowed through clean and clear, his face lit with accomplishment that erased the earlier frustration. He'd built something, fixed something, proven to himself that anger didn't have to win. Over dinner that night, Luke was more animated than Jim had seen him in months. He explained the filtration system to Maria, who'd joined them, using terms he'd learned that day, showing with his hands how water moved through different layers. The anger episodes seemed forgotten, or at least processed, transformed into determination to build better next time. After Luke went to bed, Bill pulled Jim aside. Did you see what happened today? The anger? Yeah, scared me how fast it came on. Did you see what happened after? Jim thought about it. He calmed himself down, recognized it, stopped. In one day, he learned what took you years to manage. Bill's expression carried something like hope. He's young enough that the patterns aren't set yet. We can teach him healthy responses before the unhealthy ones become automatic. You think we can actually fix this? Keep him from becoming like me? Bill gripped Jim's shoulder. You're not broken. You're healing. And Luke doesn't need fixing. He needs guidance. There's a difference. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Mornings in the barn, learning systems and building smaller versions. Afternoons exploring the property, discovering caches, understanding the scope of what Bill had protected for 40 years. Evenings with stories and planning and the kind of family time Jim had thought was lost forever. Luke's anger appeared twice more that first week. Once when a calculation wouldn't balance, once when he overheard a phone call between Jim and Carol discussing custody schedules. Both times he recognized it faster, deployed the breathing techniques Bill taught, stepped away before destruction could occur. The progress was visible, measurable, hopeful. But the third episode was different. They'd driven into Hollowbrook for supplies, Luke coming along to see the town where his grandfather had lived in relative isolation for 40 years. The hardware store, the diner, the small library that had provided Bill with research materials when the internet wasn't enough. Luke absorbed it all with the attention of someone cataloging a foreign country. At the gas station while Jim was inside paying, a man approached the truck. Late 50s, wearing a Clearwater Holdings jacket, face Jim didn't recognize but posture he'd seen before. The entitled swagger of people who worked for powerful companies and believed it made them powerful too. Luke was in the passenger seat, window down to catch the breeze, when the man leaned against the truck. You Bill Thornton's grandson? Luke nodded, uncertain. Tell your grandpa Raymond sends his regards. Tell him time's running out for stubborn old men who don't know when to quit. The man walked away before Luke could respond. Jim emerged from the store to find his son rigid with tension, hands clenched, breathing fast and shallow. What happened? Luke told him. Jim felt his own anger spike, the familiar red edge that preceded his worst episodes. He scanned the parking lot, but the Clearwater jacket had disappeared into a black SUV already pulling onto the highway. Jim forced himself to breathe, to model the control he wanted Luke to learn. Then he climbed into the truck, started the engine, drove them back toward the ranch with deliberate calm. That man works for Cole, the one Grandpa's been fighting. Is he going to hurt Grandpa? He's going to try. Jim's hands tightened on the wheel. That's why what we're building matters. Why we can't let anger make us sloppy or reckless. I want to hurt him. Luke's voice was small and fierce. For threatening Grandpa. I know. Me too, but that's exactly what Cole wants. He wants us angry and stupid, making mistakes he can exploit. So what do? We build better. We document everything. We make sure when the time comes, we have evidence he can't deny and allies he can't intimidate. Jim glanced at his son. And we don't let him make us into the kind of men who threaten children at gas stations. Luke absorbed this, processing, visibly working to redirect fury into purpose. Can we tell Grandpa? Yeah, he needs to know Cole's people are watching. Bill took the news with the calm of someone who'd expected it. He made notes about the encounter, added it to his documentation. Explain to Luke that intimidation only worked if you let it change your behavior. We keep building. We keep preparing. And when we're ready, we show the world what coal really is. That night, Jim found Luke on the porch long after bedtime, staring toward the barn where lights still glowed from Bill's late-night work. Can't sleep? Luke shook his head. I keep thinking about that man. What if he comes back? What if he hurts Grandpa? Jim sat beside his son. Your grandfather has been dealing with Cole's people for 40 years. He's still here, still fighting, still winning in the ways that matter. But he's sick. What if he can't fight anymore? Then we fight for him, you and me, together. Luke leaned against his father. I don't want to be angry all the time like I have been. You won't be. Jim put his arm around Luke's shoulders. We're learning, both of us, how to take the anger and use it for something that matters. The second week brought new challenges. Bill's health declined noticeably, his energy fading, the oxygen tank becoming necessary more often. But he pushed through, determined to teach Luke everything he could while time remained. They covered water chemistry, basic filtration principles, the politics of resource management, how corporations weaponize necessity. Luke absorbed it all with a gravity beyond his years. He took notes in a journal Bill gave him, asked questions that showed not just comprehension, but analysis. And when his anger rose, which it did less frequently as purpose replaced frustration, he managed it with tools that became more practiced each day. On the 12th day, Bill showed them the second cache, hidden near the old oak tree on the southern boundary. Inside were the mineral rights documents, the proof that Bill owned not just the ranch, but the water beneath it. Luke understood immediately what this meant. Cole can't just take the water. You own it. Legally, yes, Bill's voice carried the weight of 4 decades fighting legal battles. But Cole has lawyers who specialize in making legal things illegal and illegal things legal. That's why we need more than just rights. We need evidence of what he's planning. What is he planning? Bill showed them the photos of injection well equipment, explained Cole's strategy of contaminating aquifers to create markets for his systems. Luke's face darkened as he understood, but his anger this time was cold and focused rather than hot and explosive. That's worse than mean. That's murder. Yes, Bill met his grandson's eyes, which is why we document everything, build our case carefully, make sure when we expose him, there's no room for doubt or escape. They spent the afternoon photographing the injection wells from a distance, Luke learning to use the telephoto lens, capturing evidence without being seen. The work felt important, purposeful, transforming his anger into action. That evening, as they reviewed the photos on Bill's computer, Luke asked the question that had been building since he arrived. Grandpa, are you going to die soon? Bill didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, the cancer's spreading, maybe weeks, maybe a month. Luke's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. What happens to all this when you're gone? The ranch, the systems, the evidence. It goes to your father, and through him, to you someday. Bill pulled up files on the computer. Everything's documented, organized, ready to be used. I've spent 40 years building this case. Your father will finish it. Can I help? Bill looked at Jim, then back at Luke. That's up to your dad. Jim knelt beside Luke's chair. This is going to get dangerous when we move against Cole. Your mom would never forgive me if something happened to you, but you need help. Luke's voice was steady despite the tears on his face. And I'm a Thornton. This is my fight too. Jim thought about Bill's words, about giving Luke agency, about teaching him to channel anger into purpose, about not underestimating people because they were young. Okay, you can help, but you follow every instruction. You stay safe. And if I say we're done, we're done. Luke nodded, solemn and determined. I promise. The final days of the visit passed too quickly. They built more small systems, explored more cache locations, documented more of Cole's operations. Luke's anger appeared occasionally but never controlled him. He'd learned to see it coming, to step back, to breathe, to redirect. On the last night before returning to California this afternoon, they sat together on the porch, 3 generations of Thornton men watching stars emerge over Montana land. Bill moved slowly now, pain visible despite his stoicism, but his voice remained strong. Luke, I want you to remember something. Anger isn't weakness, it's energy, fuel. The question is what engine you put it in. I'm trying to put it in building, like you and Dad, good. But also know that sometimes anger is the right response. When you see injustice, When people are being hurt, the key is letting it sharpen your focus instead of clouding it. How do I know the difference? Bill considered this. If your anger makes you want to break things, step back. If it makes you want to build better things, lean in. Luke absorbed this wisdom, committing it to memory, along with everything else his grandfather had taught him. After he went to bed, Jim and Bill remained on the porch. "He's going to be okay," Bill said. "Better than okay. He has tools we didn't have at his age." "Thanks to you." Bill shook his head. "Thanks to all of us. You're teaching him presence. I'm teaching him purpose. Carol's teaching him stability. Derek's teaching him integrity. He's got a whole village raising him. I wish you could see him grow up." "I'm seeing what matters." Bill's voice was peaceful. "I'm seeing him learn to build instead of destroy." That's legacy enough. The drive back to San Diego felt different than the drive out. Luke talked the entire way, explaining filtration systems to Jim as if his father hadn't designed them professionally, describing the ranch, planning what he'd build next time. The anger that had defined him for months seemed transmuted into purpose. When they arrived at Carol's house, she met them in the driveway with Derek beside her. Her expression was cautious, protective, ready to see damage, too. Instead, she saw Luke run to her with excitement rather than obligation, talking rapidly about water systems and his grandfather and building things that help people. She looked over his head at Jim with something like wonder. "What did you do to him?" "Gave him something worth being angry about." Jim smiled and taught him how to use it. That night, after Luke was asleep, Derek pulled Jim aside. "Carol told me about the anger episodes. The broken tablet, the punched wall. He's learning to manage it." "How?" "Same way I am. Purpose bigger than himself. Work that matters. Understanding where the anger comes from and where it needs to go." Derek nodded slowly. "I've been where Luke is. Lost my wife. Wanted to break everything. Instead, I went undercover chasing the people who killed her. Turned rage into patience. That's what we're teaching him. Not to eliminate anger, but to aim it." The next months would bring crisis and confrontation. Bill's death and the vault opening. Cole's trial and global deployment of the systems. But the foundation was laid during those 2 weeks at the ranch. Luke learning to build instead of break. Jim learning to teach instead of control. Bill passing forward not just technology, but the wisdom to use it well. And when the hard times came, when anger would be tested and purpose challenged, they'd remember those Montana nights. The 3 generations of Thornton men sitting on a porch, watching stars, learning that legacy wasn't what you destroyed in fury, but what you built with patient determination. The water remembered, flowing clean and cold and healing, carrying forward what mattered, teaching by example that the strongest force wasn't rage, but the steady work of making things better than you found them. The call came at 3 in the morning, tearing Jim from dreams where Luke was building water systems that stretched to the horizon and Bill was young again, teaching them both with hands that didn't shake. Maria's voice carried urgency that bypassed sleep and went straight to adrenaline. "Bill collapsed an hour ago. The hospital says you need to come now." Jim was dressed and moving before his conscious mind caught up. He called Carol, woke her, explained in clipped sentences. Luke would need to come too. This couldn't be hidden or softened. His grandfather was dying, and goodbyes didn't wait for convenient timing. Carol arrived with Luke 30 minutes later, the boy dressed in yesterday's clothes, eyes wide with the particular alertness of children who know something terrible is happening but don't have words for it yet. Derek came too, solid and quiet, understanding without being told that this was family business and he was part of that family now. The drive to Hollowbrook Regional took 90 minutes that felt like hours. Luke sat between his parents and Jim's truck, Derek following in his own vehicle. Nobody spoke much. The radio stayed off. The only sound was tires on pavement and Luke's occasional question about whether Grandpa would be okay. Questions Jim answered with honesty wrapped in hope. The hospital was small and tired, the kind that served ranching communities with more dedication than resources. Maria met them in the waiting room, her weathered face drawn with exhaustion and grief barely contained. She hugged Luke first, then Jim, her body trembling slightly with the effort of holding together. "How bad?" Jim asked. "Bad. The cancer spread to his spine overnight. Paralysis from the waist down. Pain management is all they can offer now." Maria's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. "He's asking for all of you." They filed into Bill's room like mourners approaching a casket, reverent and uncertain. Bill lay propped on pillows that seemed to swallow him, oxygen tubes in his nose, monitors beeping rhythms too slow and irregular. But his eyes opened when they entered, tracked to Luke with laser focus. "There's my engineer." Bill's voice was weak but clear. "Come here, boy." Luke approached the bed with the careful bravery of children, facing adult realities they're not ready for. Bill's hand emerged from beneath blankets, reaching out. Luke took it, held on like it was the only thing keeping his grandfather anchored to life. "We finished the calculations." Luke's voice was small. "The ones you gave me, for scaling the filtration system to village size." "Show me." Luke pulled out the notebook Bill had given him, pages covered with careful numbers and diagrams. Bill studied them with the attention of someone for whom even dying couldn't override the need to teach and learn. He made small corrections, offered encouragement, treated this moment like any other lesson instead of a last one. Jim watched his father and son together, seeing the connection that had formed in 2 weeks at the ranch. Luke had learned to channel his anger into purpose under Bill's guidance, had discovered that building mattered more than breaking, had found in his grandfather what Jim himself had found too late. After Luke stepped back, Bill's eyes found Jim's. "We need to talk. Alone." Carol took Luke to the cafeteria with Derek and Maria. The room felt larger with just father and son, the monitors suddenly louder, the smell of antiseptic and approaching death more prominent. "Cole knows," Bill said without preamble. "About the ranch, about you being there, about Luke." "The gas station encounter," Luke told us. "That was just reconnaissance." Bill struggled to sit up straighter, pain crossing his face. "I got word yesterday from Maria's contacts. Cole's moving now. Emergency water rights filing tomorrow. He's claiming contamination in the aquifer requires immediate remediation. He's planning what you predicted, the injection wells." Bill's expression was grim. "He's not planning. He's already done it. Started 3 days ago while you were driving Luke back to California. Low-volume injections of industrial solvents, trichloroethylene, benzene, heavy metals, enough to trigger contamination readings, but not enough to cause immediate health crisis. That's insane. He's poisoning thousands of people. He's creating a market." Bill coughed, a wet sound that suggested lungs filling with fluid. "By the time the contamination is detected and traced back to him, he'll have a 20-year contract to remediate it with his own systems. Charges municipalities millions, while the taxpayers fund cleaning up poison he created. Can Derek stop him? Not without proof of intent. Right now, it just looks like industrial runoff from permitted operations." Bill reached for a folder on his bedside table, hands shaking with effort. "That's why you need to get the main cash, today. Before I'm gone and before Cole gets that emergency order. The vault under the barn, everything you'll need is there." Bill's breathing grew labored. Geological surveys proving the contamination is deliberate. Recorded conversations where Cole discusses the injection strategy. Financial records showing he budgeted for the contamination, knowing he'd profit from fixing it. "How long do I have?" "The emergency hearing is in 48 hours. The judge will almost certainly grant Cole temporary water rights given the contamination readings. Once he has legal authority, he'll destroy evidence and make it impossible to prove intent." Jim thought fast, calculating logistics. 36 hours to excavate the vault, 12 hours to copy and authenticate evidence. That leaves zero margin for error. Bill gripped his son's hand with surprising strength. "There's something else. The vault contains my final message. Recorded video explaining everything, but also a confession." "About what?" "About your mother. About why I really left. About the choice she made." Bill's eyes glistened. "I need you to watch it alone first. Then decide if Luke should see it." "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Watch the video." Bill released Jim's hand. "Then do what you think is right." He glanced toward the door where Carol and Luke's voices carried from the hallway. "But Jim, whatever happens, don't let Cole win. Don't let 40 years of work be for nothing." "I won't." "And don't make my mistakes." Bill's voice was fading. "Be there for Luke. Teach him. Love him openly instead of from distance. Promise me." "I promise." Bill's eyes closed, exhaustion claiming him. A nurse entered, checked monitors, adjusted medication. She looked at Jim with professional sympathy. "The doctor wants to increase pain management. It will make him more comfortable, but he'll sleep most of the time now. You should say your goodbyes." Jim brought the family back in. Each person had their moment. Carol thanked Bill for giving Luke purpose and teaching him to build. Derek promised to finish the fight against Cole using every resource he had. Maria kissed Bill's forehead and whispered something in Spanish that made him smile despite the pain. Luke was last. He climbed onto the bed carefully, lay beside his grandfather like he'd done as a much younger child with his own father. Bill's arm came around him, frail but protective. "I'm scared, Grandpa." Fear means you understand what's at stake. That's wisdom, not weakness. What if Dad can't stop Cole? Your father will do what needs doing, and you'll help him. That's what Thorntons do. We build, we fight, we finish what we start. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Easy things don't need courage. Luke was crying silently now, tears soaking into Bill's hospital gown. Bill held him, stroked his hair, whispered words Jim couldn't hear but knew were important. This was the grandfather Luke should have had for 10 years, present and teaching and loving all openly. The fact that they had only had 2 weeks made it more precious, not less. Finally, Luke sat up, wiped his eyes, kissed his grandfather's cheek. "I love you, Grandpa." "Love you too, engineer. Build something that lasts." They left Bill sleeping under increased medication, his face peaceful for the first time in weeks. In the parking lot, they stood in weak morning sun, trying to figure out logistics of grief and crisis happening simultaneously. "I need to get to the ranch," Jim said. "Start excavating the vault. We have less than 48 hours. Luke and I will help." Carol's voice was firm. "Whatever you need. This could get dangerous. Cole knows we're moving against him. Then we move smart." Derek pulled out his phone. "I'll call my forensic team. Get them mobilized. We document everything by the book so it's admissible in court." "What about Luke?" Jim looked at his son. "School starts Monday." "School can wait." Carol put her hand on Luke's shoulder. "This is more important. This is his family legacy." They caravanned back to the ranch, arriving as noon sun peeked overhead. The property looked deceptively peaceful. Irrigation channels flowing, barns standing solid, no sign of the storm about to break. But Jim saw it differently now. This land held 40 years of secrets about to emerge into daylight. Everything Bill had protected was about to be tested. Derek's forensic team arrived within 2 hours, 3 vehicles full of federal agents and documentation specialists. They established chain of custody protocols, set up recording equipment, prepared to treat the vault like the crime scene evidence it would become. Jim led them to the barn, showed them the false wall in the northwest corner. The shaft descended into darkness. Work lights illuminating a path that felt less like archaeology and more like grave robbing. "How deep?" one of the agents asked. 20 feet to the vault." Jim checked his harness, prepared to descend. "The combination is my birthday backwards." He went down first, rappelling into earth that smelled of concrete and time. The vault door loomed at the bottom, combination lock glinting in LED light. Jim entered the numbers with hands that shook slightly. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside was everything Bill had promised and more. File boxes floor to ceiling, hard drives in protective cases, a video camera on a tripod, red light blinking to show it was recording. And on a small table, a letter addressed to Jim and a leather journal with Bill's name embossed on the cover. Jim stood at the threshold of 40 years of preparation, understanding that opening this vault would change everything. No going back, no half measures. Once this evidence went public, Cole would come at them with everything he had. He called up to Derek. "Send down the documentation team. We're going to be here a while." The next 12 hours blurred into systematic excavation of truth. Agents photographed every document, verified every hard drive, established chain of custody for evidence that would eventually fill a courtroom. Derek coordinated with EPA investigators, getting warrants prepared, building the framework for federal prosecution. Jim found what Bill had described, geological surveys showing the aquifer's true structure, nothing like what Cole had submitted to regulators. Internal Clearwater memos discussing deliberate falsification. Recorded phone calls where Cole explicitly ordered contamination of water supplies to create markets. But the most damning evidence was recent, documentation of the injection well installations over the past 6 months, chemical purchase orders for industrial solvents, emails where Cole discussed timing the contamination to coincide with his emergency water rights filing. He'd planned this like a military operation, every detail calculated for maximum profit with minimum accountability. Luke helped catalog evidence, his young hands careful with documents, that could bring down an empire. He read some of them, understanding enough to grasp the enormity of what his grandfather had documented, the scope of coal's corruption, the lives damaged and destroyed, the deliberate weaponization of humanity's most basic need. Around midnight, Derek pulled Jim aside. We have enough for criminal charges, conspiracy, fraud, environmental terrorism. But Jim, we need to talk about timing. The emergency hearing is tomorrow, which gives us less than 36 hours to present this to a judge and get injunctions blocking Coal's water rights claim. Derek's expression was grave. But there's a problem. The contamination is real. It's already in the aquifer. People are going to start getting sick in days, maybe weeks. How bad? Bad enough that we need a solution, not just prosecution. If we expose coal before we can remediate the contamination, thousands of people lose access to clean water while the legal system grinds through charges and trials. What are you suggesting? We need to deploy your father's systems. Now, emergency installation across every affected well and treatment facility. Show that the technology works while simultaneously proving coal systems are unnecessary. Jim thought about the logistics. We'd need dozens of systems, hundreds maybe. We don't have that kind of manufacturing capacity. Bill's designs are documented. Open source. Derek pulled out his phone, showed maps and spreadsheets. I've been coordinating with community groups, environmental organizations. They're ready to build if we give them the plans. How fast can they move? 72 hours from green light to first systems operational. Derek met Jim's eyes. It's ambitious, maybe impossible, but it's the only way to save the aquifer and stop coal simultaneously. Luke appeared beside them, journal in hand. Grandpa planned for this. He has emergency deployment protocols. Lists of people who know how to build. Stockpiles of materials. It's all documented. Show me. Luke opened the journal to pages marked with Bill's careful planning. Contact lists for fabricators who could produce components. Community organizers who could coordinate volunteers. Engineers who'd been waiting years for permission to deploy this technology. Bill had built not just evidence, but an entire emergency response network. He knew this moment would come, Jim realized. The contamination forcing our hand, he prepared for us to move fast. Then we move. Derek started making calls. By morning, I'll have 500 volunteers ready to build. By tomorrow night, the first systems will be operational. Jim descended back into the vault, needing to see Bill's video message before making final decisions. He found the camera, stopped the recording that had been running since the vault opened, rewound to find his father's final message. The screen showed Bill in his hospital bed days or maybe weeks before his death. Still lucid, still fighting. His face filled the frame as he looked directly into the lens. James, if you're watching this, the vault is open and you're dealing with everything I left behind. First thing you need to know, your mother was the brave one, not me. Jim's throat tightened. When you got sick from the contaminated school water, when coal poisoned children to threaten me, your mother made the decision. She told me to disappear, to fake my death, to become the target so you'd be safe. Bill's voice cracked. I wanted to stay, to fight openly, but she understood that staying would get you killed. The hospital room in the video swam as Jim's eyes filled. She was dying when she made that choice. The cancer was advanced. The doctors gave her months, maybe a year. She spent her last months knowing I was gone, protecting you with a lie that destroyed her reputation in this community. People thought I abandoned her while she was sick. She let them think it. Jim paused the video, unable to watch through tears. His mother had sacrificed not just her final months with her husband, but her dignity, her reputation, everything. All to keep her son safe. He forced himself to continue. Bill wiped his own eyes on screen. I need you to forgive me if you can. Not for leaving. I'm not sure that's forgivable, but for not telling you sooner, for letting you believe I was a coward instead of a man following his wife's final wishes. Bill leaned closer to the camera. Your mother loved you more than life, literally. She traded her life for yours. That's the legacy I'm passing on. Not the filtration systems or the evidence against coal, but the knowledge that some love is so deep it looks like absence. The video ended. Jim sat in the vault surrounded by 40 years of accumulated purpose, understanding finally the full weight his parents had carried. The impossible choice between presence and protection. The sacrifice that looked like abandonment. The love that manifested as distance. He climbed out of the vault to find dawn breaking and organized chaos. Derek had mobilized his network. Trucks were arriving with materials. Volunteers gathered in groups receiving instructions. Carol coordinated logistics with the efficiency of someone running a field hospital. And Luke moved between groups explaining Bill's designs with the confidence of someone who'd learned from the master. "We're calling it the Thornton Protocol," Derek explained, showing Jim a hastily printed manual. "Emergency water treatment using your father's biological filtration at scale. Every community organization within 3 counties is mobilizing." "How many systems?" 300 by midnight tomorrow." Derek's expression carried determined hope. "It's audacious. But if we pull it off, we'll have clean water flowing before Cole's hearing even starts. And if we don't, then thousands of people drink poison water while we wait for courts and regulations to catch up with reality." No pressure. They worked through the day and into night, Jim teaching volunteers the core principles, while Luke demonstrated specific techniques. Bill's designs proved elegant in their simplicity, buildable with common materials and basic tools. The kind of technology that was revolutionary precisely because it was accessible. By evening, the first prototype was complete. They tested it with water from a contaminated well. Watch the murky liquid flow through biological filters, emerge crystal clear. Test results showed contaminant removal rates exceeding anything manufactured by Clearwater Holdings. "It works," Carol breathed, staring at the data. "Bill's system actually works better than Cole's, because it's working with nature instead of against it." Duh. Jim felt pride and grief tangled together. "My father spent 40 years perfecting this. Now we get to show the world." Maria appeared with food nobody had time to eat, but everyone needed. She moved through volunteers like a general inspecting troops, offering encouragement and making sure people stayed hydrated and focused. When she reached Jim, she pulled him aside. "Bill died an hour ago, peacefully. The hospital just called." The words landed but didn't quite penetrate. Jim had been expecting them, preparing for them, but expectation didn't make grief easier. He stood motionless, trying to process the permanence of it. "He knew you'd be doing this." Maria gestured at the organized chaos of system building. "He timed his final messages so you'd be too busy to fall apart." "That's very Bill." Jim almost laughed through tears. "Yeah, that's exactly him. Go see him when you can, but finish this first." He'd want the work completed before the morning. That night, Jim took Luke to the hospital. They sat with Bill's body in the quiet room, the monitors now silent, the oxygen disconnected. Luke cried against his father's chest while Jim held him and remembered the man who'd taught them both that building mattered more than breaking. "We're deploying 300 systems tonight," Jim told the empty room. "Using your designs, saving the people Cole tried to poison." "You won, Dad. You actually won." Luke lifted his head. "Should we tell him about the systems working?" "I think he knows, buddy." They stayed until hospital staff needed the room, then drove back to the ranch where work continued under floodlights. Volunteers moved with purpose, building systems that would save their neighbors from contamination. The kind of grassroots response to corporate evil that Bill had spent 40 years making possible. By midnight, 200 systems were complete and being installed across the affected region. By dawn, 300. Water that had tested positive for industrial contaminants 12 hours earlier now flowed clean through biological filters that cost a fraction of Clearwater's technology. The emergency hearing convened at 9 in the morning. Cole sat at the defendant's table looking confident, surrounded by expensive lawyers, certain the contamination evidence would force the judge to grant him emergency water rights. Derek presented first, documenting the contamination and its source. Then he presented something Cole wasn't expecting. Video of 300 community-built filtration systems already operational and cleaning the water his company had poisoned. The contamination Mr. Cole claims requires his expensive intervention has been remediated in 72 hours using technology developed by William Thornton. Technology that's now public domain. Derek displayed test results on a screen. These systems remove contaminants more effectively than Clearwater's proprietary technology at 1/10 the cost. Cole's lawyers objected, called it hearsay, claimed the systems hadn't been properly tested or certified. But Derek had anticipated every argument: chain of custody documentation, independent lab verification, video evidence of system construction and deployment. Then Derek played his final card. He presented recordings of Cole discussing the deliberate contamination strategy, internal memos planning the injection well installations, financial projections showing expected profits from a 20-year remediation contract. The judge's expression shifted from skeptical to furious as she reviewed evidence. She called a recess, returned 30 minutes later with a ruling. This court finds overwhelming evidence of criminal fraud and environmental terrorism. Clearwater Holdings' emergency water rights petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order prohibiting Clearwater from operating in this jurisdiction and referring this matter to federal prosecutors for immediate investigation. Cole's lawyers erupted in objections, but the judge gavelled them down. Mr. Cole, you deliberately poisoned an aquifer to create a market for your systems. That's not business, that's bioterrorism. Court adjourned pending criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, news cameras captured Derek's statement about the Thornton Protocol and Bill's 40-year fight. Environmental reporters who'd covered corporate water scandals for years recognized the story's significance. An ordinary engineer spending decades building evidence that brought down a billion-dollar corporation. Jim stood beside Derek with Luke and Carol, answering questions about his father's legacy and the community response that had deployed 300 systems in 72 hours. He described the technology simply, emphasized its accessibility, made clear that Bill's designs were free for anyone to use. This isn't about profit, Jim said into a microphone. It's about making sure everyone has access to clean water, regardless of what they can afford. That's what my father spent his life building. Reporters asked about Bill, wanting the personal story. Jim kept it simple, told them about a man who'd been wronged and spent 40 years building something better than revenge. Who'd chosen patient evidence gathering over immediate confrontation. Who died knowing his work would save millions of lives. Luke stepped forward, small among adults but clear-voiced. My grandfather taught me that anger is energy. You can use it to break things or build things. He chose building. We're going to keep building. The image of a 10-year-old boy defending his grandfather's legacy made every news broadcast that evening. Luke became the face of the Thornton Protocol, the next generation carrying forward work that would transform global water access. Federal prosecutors filed charges within days. Conspiracy, fraud, environmental terrorism, accessory to murder for deaths linked to deliberately contaminated Clearwater systems. The evidence from Bill's vault was overwhelming, 40 years of documentation that couldn't be denied or explained away. Cole's trial would take months, but the outcome was certain. The man who'd built an empire on stolen technology and human suffering would spend the rest of his life in federal prison. But for Jim, standing in the barn where his father had spent 4 decades building in secret, the real victory wasn't Cole's conviction. It was the 300 systems running across 3 counties, the water flowing clean and cold and healing, the community that had mobilized in 72 hours to save itself. Luke appeared beside him, journal open to calculations for scaling the systems even larger. Dad, I've been thinking about what Grandpa said, about building something that lasts. Yeah? I want to keep doing this, learning the systems, teaching other people, making sure everyone has clean water. Jim pulled his son close, feeling the determination in that small frame. That's exactly what your grandfather would want, not just what he'd want. Luke looked up at his father. What I want, because I'm angry about what Cole did, about people getting poisoned for profit, and I'm going to use that anger to build something better. That's my boy. They stood together in the barn as evening fell, father and son, carrying forward a legacy that stretched back through Bill's 40 years and forward toward a future where water was a right instead of a commodity, where corporations couldn't weaponize necessity, where patient building defeated immediate greed. Bill Thornton had died knowing his work would continue, that his son would finish what he'd started, that his grandson would carry it forward into decades he'd never see. The water remembered, flowing through systems built with purpose and deployed with love, teaching by example that the strongest force wasn't corporate power or concentrated wealth, but ordinary people choosing to build something better than what they'd inherited. And in the barn's quiet, surrounded by tools and diagrams and the ghost of a man who'd refused to quit, Jim understood finally what his father had been trying to teach him all along. Legacy wasn't what you left behind when you died. It was what you built while you lived. Not for glory or recognition, but because something mattered too much to leave undone. The fight wasn't over. Cole's empire needed dismantling. The Thornton Protocol needed scaling globally. Millions more people needed access to clean water. But tonight in this barn, on this land his father had protected for 40 years, Jim allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They'd won. Not perfectly, not without cost, but completely enough that Bill could rest and Luke could build and the water could flow clean into a future they'd fought to make possible. That was legacy. That was victory. That was enough. The funeral took place on a Tuesday morning when frost still clung to the grass and the Montana sky stretched endlessly blue. They buried Bill Thornton in the small cemetery on the eastern edge of his property, beneath a cottonwood tree he'd planted 30 years ago when he first bought the land. The hole had been dug by hand, Jim and Derek taking turns with shovels, refusing the offer of a backhoe because some work demanded sweat and silence. Luke stood between his parents, Carol having driven up from San Diego with flowers, and the kind of quiet respect death commands, even from the divorced. Maria Santos stood at the head of the grave, her weathered hands holding a Bible that had belonged to Bill's mother. Around them gathered maybe 30 people, ranchers and neighbors who'd known Bill as the quiet eccentric who fixed their water without asking payment and never talked about why. Maria read from Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest. Her voice carried across the land Bill had transformed from simple ranch into something that would outlive them all. She spoke about a man who'd chosen the long fight over the easy surrender, who'd built in secret what others destroyed in public, who'd loved his son enough to let him go and trusted him enough to bring him back. Derek stood in his dress uniform, not as a deputy, but as a pallbearer, one of 6 men who'd lowered the simple pine coffin into Montana earth. Beside him stood federal prosecutors who'd spent the past week building cases that would take years to fully prosecute, men who'd flown in from Washington because Bill's evidence had exposed corruption that reached into Congress itself. Jim stood holding Luke's hand, watching dirt cover his father's coffin, thinking about the last conversation they'd had, about building instead of destroying, about being present instead of absent, about forgiveness that came too late to change the past, but just in time to redirect the future. The service ended. People approached to offer condolences that all sounded the same. Sorry for your loss. He was a good man. He'll be missed. Jim accepted them with the numb politeness of someone still processing grief too large to fit into words. But when Maria hugged him, when she whispered that Bill had died knowing his son loved him, something broke in Jim's chest and he wept against her shoulder, while Luke held his waist and Carol's hand rested gentle on his back. After everyone left, Jim stayed, sat on the cold ground beside the fresh grave while Luke explored the cemetery, reading weathered headstones, learning the names of people who'd worked this land generations before. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, melting the frost. Somewhere a meadowlark sang the kind of song that belonged to open spaces. Derek approached, carrying 2 coffee thermoses. He sat beside Jim without asking permission, poured coffee into metal cups that steamed in the morning air. Federal prosecutors want to talk to you tomorrow, Derek said. They're building RICO cases against Cole and 15 Clearwater executives. Your testimony will be crucial. I'll be there. They also want to discuss the filtration technology. Bill's patents are going to be declared public domain, given the evidence of theft. That means anyone can manufacture his systems now. Jim watched Luke crouch beside a headstone, tracing letters with his finger. That's what Bill would have wanted. Clean water for everyone who needs it, not just people who can afford it. There's interest from NGOs, United Nations Water Initiatives, USAID. They all want to deploy Bill's systems in developing countries. Derek sipped his coffee. Millions of people could have clean water within 5 years if the rollout goes smoothly. The scope of it was overwhelming. One man's 40-year fight about to transform global access to the most basic human need. Jim thought about all the children who wouldn't get sick from contaminated water, all the communities that wouldn't have to choose between disease and dehydration, all the lives saved because Bill Thornton had been too stubborn to quit. What about Cole? Jim asked. Derek's expression went hard. He's been arrested, no bail. Federal charges include conspiracy, fraud, environmental terrorism, and accessory to murder. The evidence we found in Bill's vault connects Clearwater to 17 deaths across 4 states. People who died from cancers linked to deliberately contaminated water supplies. Will he go to prison? If there's any justice left in the system. Derek set down his coffee. But even if he doesn't, his empire is destroyed. Clearwater Holdings filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Every contract is being audited. Every system they installed is being tested. The company won't survive. Good. They sat in silence. 2 men who'd started as enemies and become lies through the crucible of fighting something bigger than themselves. Luke wandered back, climbed into Jim's lap despite being almost too big for it, needing the comfort of physical contact. Is Grandpa really down there? Luke asked. His body is. Jim tightened his arms around his son. But the important parts of him, the things that made him who he was, those are still here. In the land he protected, in the water he cleaned, in you and me carrying forward what he built. Luke was quiet for a moment. I want to help with the water systems. When I'm older. You will. Jim kissed the top of his son's head. That's exactly what Grandpa would want. Carol appeared, walking carefully between headstones, picking her way toward them. She changed out of her funeral dress into jeans and a sweater, looking more like the woman Jim had married than the polished professional she'd become. She sat on Jim's other side, completing a circle of family that had broken and was slowly reforming into something different, but no less real. Luke should get back to school Monday, she said. He's already missed a week. I know, Jim had been avoiding thinking about logistics, about custody schedules and the long drive between Montana and California, about how to be present in Luke's daily life while managing the ranch and Bill's legacy. Carol seemed to read his thoughts. I've been talking to Derek about moving. Jim's heart skipped. Moving where? Here, Montana. Carol gestured toward the land stretching beyond the cemetery. There's a hospital in Hollowbrook that needs nurses. Derek can transfer to the county sheriff's department. We could buy a house close enough that Luke can see you regularly without the constant driving. You'd leave California for this? Carol looked at the grave, at the land, at Luke sitting in Jim's lap. I'd leave for him, so he can know his father. Learn from him, understand where he comes from. She paused. And because what Bill built here matters, someone needs to document it, study it, make sure it gets implemented correctly around the world. That's someone being you? I'm a nurse. I understand waterborne illness better than most engineers. Carol's voice carried a determination Jim remembered from when they'd first met. I could coordinate with health organizations, train people to maintain the systems, make sure they're used to actually help people instead of just becoming another exploited technology. Jim looked at Derek, who nodded. We've talked about it. Both of us want to be part of this. Honor what Bill did. Make sure it counts for something beyond just destroying coal. The idea settled over Jim like sunrise, illuminating possibilities he hadn't let himself imagine. His son living close, Carol and Derek as allies instead of obstacles. A team working together to deploy Bill's systems globally. Family redefined not by marriage or blood, but by shared purpose. I'd like that, Jim said simply. Luke looked up at his father. Does that mean I can learn to build the water systems? Yeah, buddy, that's exactly what it means. They sat together beside Bill's grave until the sun reached its peak and shadows shortened to nothing. Then they walked back to the ranch house where Maria had prepared food nobody felt like eating, but everyone picked at anyway. People came and went through the afternoon, offering memories of Bill and questions about the future and quiet support that felt more valuable than words. By evening, only family remained. Jim, Luke, Carol, Derek, and Maria sitting around the kitchen table that had witnessed 40 years of Bill's solitary meals. They talked about practical things, the ranch's future, legal matters, distribution of Bill's modest estate, but underneath ran deeper currents, grief and purpose, ending and beginning, death making space for life to reorganize itself. Maria pulled out a document, slid it across to Jim. Bill had this drawn up last year. Knew his time was limited even before the cancer diagnosis got serious. Jim opened the folder, found Bill's will and several other legal documents. The ranch and all water rights were left to Jim. The filtration system designs and all patents were designated public domain, held in trust by a foundation Bill had established. Maria was named executor, with Derek as backup. There were specific bequests, money for Luke's education, donations to water charities, small amounts to neighbors who'd shown Bill kindness over the decades. But the most significant document was a letter of instruction detailing Bill's vision for the ranch's future. He wanted it transformed into a teaching center, a place where engineers and community leaders from around the world could learn to build and maintain biological filtration systems. He'd already established the framework, created lesson plans, identified funding sources through grants and donations. He built a school, Jim said, reading through the detailed plans, a whole curriculum for sustainable water systems. He built a legacy. Maria's eyes glistened, something that would keep giving long after he was gone. Can we do this? Jim looked around the table. Turn the ranch into what he envisioned? Derek nodded. The federal government is offering grants for water technology education. With the publicity from Cole's trial, funding won't be a problem. I can help with medical training components, Carol added. Teaching people to recognize waterborne illness, building health monitoring into the system deployment. Luke raised his hand like he was in school. Can I help too? Everyone smiled. Maria reached over, squeezed his hand. You're the most important part, mijo. You'll be the first student. Learn everything so someday you can teach others. Jim felt the weight of it settling. His father's 40-year plan extending decades into the future. Generations of people learning to build instead of destroy. To heal instead of harm. To work with nature instead of against it. All starting here on 400 acres of Montana land that had looked like failure but was actually the longest of long-term investments. That night, after Carol and Derek had driven Luke back to their hotel, after Maria had gone home, Jim walked out to the barn. The excavation site where they'd accessed the main vault was still open, work lights illuminating the shaft and the concrete bunker below. He climbed down, stood in the space that had held 40 years of secrets, now empty except for the video camera still on its tripod. The red recording light blinked. Jim realized it had been running since the moment they'd opened the vault. Days of footage documenting everything that had happened since. He pressed stop, ejected the memory card, held it in his palm. Bill's final message, he'd called it, but there was more here than just an old man's last words. Jim climbed back up, took the memory card to the house, loaded it on his laptop. The video began with the vault door opening, Jim's face appearing, young and determined and scared. Luke beside him, eyes wide with discovery. Then hours of footage showing them inventorying evidence. Derek's team arriving. The careful documentation and copying, all of it preserved. But when Jim fast-forwarded to the end, he found something unexpected. Bill must have set the camera on a timer, recorded a final message before he died. The footage showed Bill in his hospital bed, oxygen tubes in his nose, face gaunt but eyes clear. He looked directly into the camera as if he could see across time to this moment when Jim would watch. Son, Bill's recorded voice came through the laptop speakers. If you're watching this, the vault is open and you're dealing with everything I left behind. I'm sorry for the burden. Sorry for leaving you with fights I couldn't finish. But I'm also grateful you were willing to take them on. Jim's throat tightened. His father looked so small in the hospital bed, diminished by illness but not defeated. I want to tell you about your mother, Bill continued, about who she really was. People think I'm the hero of this story, the man who fought Cole for 40 years. But your mother was braver than I ever was. The camera angles shifted slightly. Bill must have adjusted it, making sure his face was centered. When you got sick from the contaminated school water, when we knew Cole had poisoned children to threaten me, your mother made the decision. Not me. Her. She said I had to disappear. Had to make myself the target so you'd be safe. I wanted to stay, wanted to fight Cole openly, but she understood what I couldn't see, that staying would get you killed. Bill paused, struggling with emotion and pain. She died at 6 months after I left. Cancer, the doctor said. But I always believed it was poisoning, Cole's final punishment for my defiance. Your mother knew she was dying when she told me to go. She sacrificed her last months with me so you could live. That's the kind of courage I've spent 40 years trying to honor. Jim wiped his eyes, his father's image blurring through tears. I need you to understand something, Jim. The filtration systems, the evidence against Cole, the 40 years of preparation, none of that was about revenge. It was about making sure your mother's sacrifice meant something, making sure you got to live in a world where corporations can't poison children for profit, where clean water is a right instead of a privilege, where the vulnerable have protection. Bill's breathing had grown labored. The recording was clearly near the end of his life. You have a son now, Luke, my grandson, the future I was fighting for. Don't make my mistakes, Jim. Don't choose the grand gesture over daily presence. Don't sacrifice years for the sake of years. Be there for him. Teach him. Show him how to build. And when the time comes, when Luke is ready, tell him about his grandmother. Tell him about the woman who gave everything so he could exist. The recording showed Bill reaching toward the camera, his hand filling the frame. I love you, son. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry I wasn't a better father. But I hope what I've left you, the systems and the evidence and the vision for the future, I hope that counts for something. Finish it, win it, then live the rest of your life better than I lived mine. The screen went black. The recording ended. Jim sat in the quiet house, his father's last words echoing in the silence, feeling the full weight of 3 generations. His grandmother's sacrifice, his father's 40-year fight, his own chance to do it differently, to be present while still building something that mattered. He thought about Luke, asleep at a hotel in town, dreaming whatever 10-year-olds dream. About the opportunity to teach him not just engineering, but presence. Not just how to build filtration systems, but how to be there for people who needed you. About breaking the pattern of Thornton men who loved from a distance and sacrificed connection for principle. Jim opened his notebook, started making plans. The teaching center Bill had envisioned would need buildings, dormitories for students, classrooms, labs, a demonstration site showing the filtration systems at various scales. He sketched layouts, calculated costs, made lists of what needed doing. The work felt good, purposeful, like his father beside him, guiding his hand across the page. The next weeks blurred together in a chaos of activity and grief processed through labor. Federal investigators came and went, building cases that would take years to fully prosecute. Journalists descended, wanting to tell Bill's story, the quiet engineer who'd spent 40 years collecting evidence against a corporate giant. Jim gave interviews carefully, always redirecting focus from personalities to principles. This wasn't about Bill Thornton the man. It was about what one person could accomplish with patience and purpose. Cole's trial began in federal court. Jim testified for 3 days, walking prosecutors through the evidence, explaining the filtration systems, describing how Cole had built an empire on stolen technology and human suffering. Cole's lawyers attacked his credibility, brought up his PTSD, suggested he was continuing his dead father's paranoid delusions. But the evidence was overwhelming. Documents, recordings, testimonies from former Clearwater employees who'd watched Cole order contaminations and cover-ups. The jury convicted on all counts: 17 counts of conspiracy, 23 counts of fraud, 8 counts of accessory to murder. The judge sentenced Cole to 45 years in federal prison. At 68 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. As marshals led Cole away in handcuffs, he looked at Jim with pure hatred. "Your father was a coward who hid for 40 years, Cole's voice carried across the courtroom. "And you're just his broken son playing at being a hero." Jim met his eyes calmly. "My father spent 40 years building something that will help millions of people. You spent 40 years poisoning them for profit. History will remember which of us was the coward." Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them. Derek handled most of the questions while Jim stood beside him, uncomfortable with attention, but understanding its necessity. The story needed to be told. Not for glory, but to show that patience and preparation could defeat wealth and power. That one person's determination could matter. Carol was waiting by their car, Luke beside her. Jim's son broke free, ran to him, wrapped arms around his waist. "You won, Dad." "We won," Jim corrected, kneeling to Luke's level. "All of us. Grandpa and Derek and your mom and everyone who helped. That's how big things get done. Together." Luke nodded seriously. "Can we go home now, to the ranch?" Home. The word settled warm in Jim's chest. "Yeah, buddy, let's go home." The drive back to Montana took 2 days. Carol and Derek followed in their own car, all of them caravanning north toward a future none of them had imagined 6 months ago. They stopped at roadside motels and diners, ate meals together like a family that didn't fit traditional definitions but worked anyway. Luke divided his time between vehicles, sometimes riding with Jim, sometimes with his mother, comfortable with both. At a rest stop in Wyoming, Derek pulled Jim aside while Carol took Luke to the restroom. "I want to say something before we get to the ranch." Derek's voice was serious. "About Carol and me, about Luke." Jim tensed, old jealousies rising before he consciously pushed them down. "I love them," Derek continued. "Both of them. But I'm not trying to replace you. I know Luke needs his father, needs you specifically, not just any stable male figure. My role is different, complementary, not competitive." Jim appreciated the directness. "I know. And I'm grateful you've been there for them, especially when I couldn't be. That's changing, though. You're healing, getting stronger, building something important." Derek extended his hand. "I'd like us to be allies in raising Luke. Different roles, but same team." Jim shook his hand. "Same team." They reached the ranch on a Friday evening as the sun painted the sky orange and pink. The property looked different now. Construction equipment was scattered around where the teaching center would be built. Solar panels had been installed to power the expanded filtration systems. New fencing marked boundaries for the demonstration sites where different scales of water treatment would be shown. But the barn still stood, weathered and solid, Bill's monument to patient work. The house still held memories in every room. And the land still stretched toward mountains, holding secrets and stories and the quiet satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Maria met them on the porch, her face lighting up as Luke ran to her. She'd been managing the ranch in Jim's absence, coordinating with contractors, handling the flood of interest from organizations wanting to learn Bill's methods. She hugged everyone, ushered them inside where she prepared a meal that filled the kitchen with warmth and the smell of home. Over dinner, they talked about the teaching center's timeline. The first class of students would arrive in 3 months. 15 engineers and community leaders from 7 countries, coming to learn biological filtration and take it back to their communities. The curriculum Bill had designed covered not just technical aspects, but community organizing, funding strategies, maintenance training, everything needed to make the system sustainable. Carol had already started coordinating with health organizations, developing protocols for monitoring water quality and tracking health improvements in communities that implemented the systems. Derek was working with federal agencies to provide grants and support for deploying the technology in Native American reservations and rural communities across the United States. And Luke, they'd enrolled him in Hollowbrook's small school where he'd be the new kid, but also the grandson of the man who'd become something of a local legend. He was nervous about it, Jim could tell, but also excited. Ready for a fresh start in a place where his father's anger was becoming his father's purpose. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jim walked out to Bill's grave. The grass had started growing over the disturbed earth, nature already reclaiming what humans had briefly interrupted. He sat on the ground, back against the cottonwood, looking up through branches at stars that seemed close enough to touch. "We did it, Dad. Cole's in prison. The systems are going public. The ranch is becoming what you envisioned." Jim spoke quietly to the darkness and the earth and whatever part of Bill might still be listening. "I just wish you were here to see it." The wind moved through the cottonwood leaves, making a sound like water flowing. Jim closed his eyes, felt something like peace settling over him. The PTSD was still there, probably always would be, but manageable now. Therapy helped. Purpose helped. Having something to build instead of rage against helped most of all. His phone buzzes, a text from Luke. "Can't sleep, miss you." Jim smiled, texted back. "I'm outside, want to join me?" Minutes later, Luke appeared in pajamas and boots, carrying blankets. He settled beside his father, pulled the blanket around both of them, stared up at the same stars. "What are you doing out here?" Luke asked. "Talking to Grandpa, telling him how things are going." "Can he hear you?" Jim thought about that. "I don't know, maybe. Or maybe I'm just talking to make myself feel better. Either way seems okay." They sat in comfortable silence. Father and son, third and fourth generation of Thornton men learning to be present in the same space without filling it with words. Overhead, a satellite crawled across the sky, man-made star among the ancient ones. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed. Water rushed through irrigation channels, clean and cold and healing. "Tomorrow I started the new school," Luke said quietly. "Nervous?" "Yeah. What if the other kids don't like me?" "They will. But even if some don't, you'll find your people." Jim pulled Luke closer. "And you've got something most kids don't, a purpose. You're learning to build systems that help people. That matters more than being popular." Did Grandpa have friends when he was building all this? Not many. People thought he was strange, obsessed. But he didn't need everyone to understand, just enough people to help when it counted. Like Maria? Like Maria. And eventually like me and Derek and your mom. Sometimes the right people show up exactly when you need them. Luke was quiet for a long moment. "Dad, do you think Grandpa would be proud of me?" The question hit Jim hard. He thought about Bill in the hospital bed, asking to meet his grandson. The way his father's face had lit up when Luke explained the water cycles. The hope in Bill's eyes that the legacy would continue. "I know he would be." Jim's voice was thick. "You're exactly what he was fighting for. A kid who gets to grow up safe and healthy and curious. Who gets to learn instead of just survive. Who gets to build the future instead of just inheriting the past. I want to make him proud. You already do, just by being here, by caring, by wanting to help. Jim kissed the top of Luke's head. That's all he ever wanted, for his grandson to have choices he never had. They stayed until the cold drove them inside, then fell asleep in Bill's old room, Luke in the bed, Jim in the chair beside it, watching over his son the way Bill had watched over him from a distance for so many years. The circle completing itself, the pattern breaking and reforming into something healthier. The months that followed brought transformation. The teaching center rose from Montana soil, buildings designed to blend with the land, powered by solar and wind, using Bill's filtration systems to demonstrate the technology students came to learn. The first class arrived in spring, 15 people from Kenya, Bolivia, Bangladesh, Arizona, and Mississippi. They came as strangers and left as a community, bonded by shared purpose and the revolutionary simplicity of what they'd learned. Jim taught the engineering components, walking students through bacterial colonies and filtration layers, showing them how to build systems from local materials. Carol taught the health aspects, explaining waterborne diseases and community health monitoring. Derek covered the legal and political challenges of implementing new technology in communities resistant to change. And Maria, who'd seen Bill's entire 40-year journey, taught the most important lesson: patience, persistence, the long view that looked past immediate obstacles to eventual victory. Luke attended every class, soaking up knowledge like the filtration systems absorb contaminants. At 11 years old, he could explain biological processes that confuse graduate students, could build a simple filtration system from scratch, could test water quality and interpret results. But more than technical knowledge, he absorbed the ethic: building instead of destroying, helping instead of harming, being present in the work that mattered. The second class brought 30 students. The third brought 50. By the end of the first year, over 200 people had trained at the Thornton Water Institute, taking Bill's technology to communities across 6 continents. Follow-up reports showed remarkable results: disease rates dropping, children's health improving, communities gaining independence from expensive corporate water systems. The kind of change that wouldn't make headlines but would save lives for generations. Jim documented it all, creating reports and case studies and photo essays that showed Bill's vision becoming reality. On the anniversary of his father's death, he published a book, not about coal or the trial or the dramatic confrontation, but about one man's quiet 40-year fight to protect an aquifer and change the world. The book sold modestly, mostly to engineers and water professionals, but that was enough. The story was preserved. The lessons were recorded. Future generations would know what Bill Thornton had built. The second anniversary brought a visitor Jim hadn't expected, a young woman in her 30s introducing herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, epidemiologist with the World Health Organization. She'd read Jim's book, studied Bill's systems, and had a proposal. "Your father's technology could provide clean water to 50 million people in the next decade," she said, sitting in the ranch kitchen where so many plans had been made. "But we need to scale production, create regional manufacturing hubs, train thousands of installers and maintenance workers. It's too big for one ranch to handle." Jim listened as she outlined a plan: international partnerships, government funding, corporate sponsors who'd learned from coal's downfall that sustainability mattered. A global network of Thornton Institutes teaching Bill's methods in local languages and cultural contexts. "It's what he wanted," Jim said. "Water for everyone who needs it, no matter where they live or what they can afford." Dr. Chen smiled. "Then let's make it happen." Over the next year, Jim traveled more than he wanted to, visiting potential partners, speaking at conferences, advocating for public domain technology over corporate patents. Carol came with him sometimes, bringing medical expertise and the ability to connect with health ministers and NGO leaders. Derek stayed home, managing the original ranch and teaching center, keeping the heart of it all beating steady. And Luke, growing like grass in spring, splitting time between school and the institute, between being a normal kid and being the grandson of someone who'd changed the world. He played baseball and built filtration systems, struggled with algebra and aced environmental science, made friends and kept his family's secrets, became exactly the kind of balanced person Bill had hoped his legacy would create. On what would have been Bill's 75th birthday, they gathered at his grave: Jim, Carol, Derek, Luke, Maria, and maybe 100 students who'd trained at the Institute. They planted a tree beside the cottonwood, a young sapling that would grow tall and strong, providing shade for future generations. Maria said a prayer. Students shared stories about how Bill's systems had transformed their communities. And Jim read from his father's final letter, the words about building instead of destroying, about presence over gesture, about legacy measured in lives saved rather than battles won. Luke staggered forward holding a plaque they'd had made. Bronze letters on Montana granite. It read, William Thornton, 1952 to 2024. Engineer, father, visionary. He taught us that one person with patience and purpose can change the world. He taught us that water, like love, should be freely given. He taught us to build. They mounted the plaque on a stone beside the grave. Jim stood back, Luke's hand in his, looking at his father's name etched in metal and rock. Permanent, remembered, honored. Thank you, Jim said quietly, for everything, for the fight you fought, for the son you raised even from a distance, for trusting me to finish what you started. The wind moved through both trees now, old and young, making music together. Somewhere on the ranch, water flowed through systems Bill had designed and Jim had perfected and students had learned to replicate. Clean and cold and healing, flowing toward people who needed it, carrying forward a legacy that would outlive them all. That evening, as the sun set over mountains Bill had loved, Jim sat on the porch with his family. Carol beside him, Derek in Bill's old rocking chair, Luke at their feet working on a model of a filtration system for his school science project. Maria brought coffee and cookies, settled into the chair she'd claimed as her own over 2 years of daily visits. Bill would have loved this, Maria said, looking at the family gathered together. All of you here, working together, making his dream real. I think he knew it would happen, Carol said. That's why he prepared so carefully. He trusted that the right people would come together when the time was right. Derek raised his coffee cup to Bill Thornton, stubborn son of a bitch who refused to quit. They all raised cups, even Luke with his milk, to Bill. Jim looked out at the land as darkness fell, at the barn where secrets had been kept and revealed, at the teaching center where light glowed in windows as students studied, at the fields where water flowed clean and pure, at the grave beneath the cottonwood where his father rested, work finally done, battle finally won. And he understood, finally, what Bill had been trying to teach him all along. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die. It's what you build while you're alive. Not grand gestures or heroic sacrifices, but daily work, patient accumulation, steady progress towards something bigger than yourself. Bill had spent 40 years building a legacy one day at a time. Now Jim was doing the same, but differently, present instead of absent, connected instead of isolated, teaching Luke not just how to build filtration systems, but how to be a man who showed up, who stayed, who loved openly instead of from a distance. Luke looked up from his model. Dad, how many people do you think are drinking clean water right now because of Grandpa? Jim thought about the reports on his desk. 200 communities in 40 countries. Conservative estimates said 3 million people, growing every month as more systems came online. Millions, buddy, and counting. That's a lot. Yeah, that's what happens when you build something that lasts, when you plant seeds that grow beyond your lifetime. Jim pulled Luke close. That's the kind of legacy worth having. Can we build that kind too, together? Jim looked at his son, seeing 3 generations reflected in his young face. Bill's determination, Jim's stubbornness, something new and hopeful that belonged only to Luke. Yeah, we can. We already are. Night settled fully over the ranch. Stars emerged in numbers that still amazed Jim after 2 years of Montana skies. The temperature dropped, but they stayed on the porch, wrapped in blankets, talking about plans and dreams and the future spreading before them like the land itself. Somewhere in the darkness, water flowed, clean and cold and healing, touching lives Bill would never meet, saving children who would never know his name, changing the world in ways that wouldn't be measured for generations. But for now, in this moment, on this porch, surrounded by family both given and chosen, Jim felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace, purpose, the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered, of promises kept, of legacy honored and extended and passed forward to the next generation. Bill Thornton had spent 40 years building in secret. Now his son was building in the open, teaching others to build, creating a future where clean water wasn't a privilege but a right, where corporations couldn't poison people for profit, where one person's patient work could ripple across decades and continents and lives. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and coming snow. Winter would arrive soon, blanketing the land in white, slowing but not stopping the work. Spring would come after, as it always did, bringing new students and new communities and new chances to make Bill's vision real. Jim stood, helped Carol and Derek carry dishes inside, checked that Luke had brushed his teeth and said his prayers. Tucked his son into bed in the room that had been his own, then his father's workshop, and now was becoming Luke's space to grow and dream and plan his own legacy. Before turning out the light, Luke asked one more question. "Do you think Grandpa knows about everything we're doing?" Jim sat on the edge of the bed, considering carefully. "I think if any part of him still exists, he knows, but even if he doesn't, it doesn't change what we're doing. We're not building this for him anymore. We're building it for all the people who need clean water, for you and your kids someday, for a world that's a little bit better than the one we inherited." That's what Grandpa wanted. That's what he wanted. Jim kissed Luke's forehead. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we have work to do." He descended the stairs, found Carol waiting by the door. They walked together to the barn, stood looking at the space that had held so many secrets and now held a different kind of treasure. Memories. Purpose. The ghost of a man who'd taught them all how to fight the long fight. "Thank you for moving here," Jim said, "for believing this mattered, for raising Luke somewhere he can see what purpose looks like." Carol leaned against him. "Thank you for becoming someone worth believing in, for fighting your way back from the darkness, for showing Luke what redemption looks like." They stood together in the barn's cool quiet, two people who'd loved and failed and found their way to something better than what they'd lost. Not marriage again, not romance, but partnership, shared purpose, the deep friendship that came from surviving hard things together. Derek's truck pulled into the yard, returning from a meeting with county officials about expanding the institute. He joined them in the barn, and the three of them stood looking at diagrams of future expansions. More buildings, more students, more systems deployed to more communities. "We're going to need help," Derek said. "This is getting too big for just us." "Good," Jim replied. "That means it's working. That means Bill's vision is spreading beyond what any of us can control." That's exactly what should happen. They worked until midnight, planning and dreaming and building the future one decision at a time. Then they said goodnight, Derek and Carol driving to the house they'd bought in town, Jim climbing the stairs to his own bed in his father's house. Before sleeping, he stood at the window looking out at the land, the barn dark now, the teaching center's windows glowing soft, the irrigation channels he couldn't see but knew were flowing, all of it part of something larger than himself, than Bill, than any individual person. Legacy, Jim understood now, wasn't about being remembered. It was about building something so useful, so necessary, that it became invisible, like water itself, essential, everywhere. Taken for granted because it worked so well nobody noticed. That's what Bill had created. That's what Jim was helping to spread. That's what Luke would carry forward. Not monuments to Thornton pride, but systems that served humanity. Not glory, but quiet service. Not recognition, but results. Jim fell asleep thinking about water, how it flowed downhill, finding the easiest path, shaping the land through patient persistence, how it was both soft and strong, yielding and powerful, essential and humble, how it taught by example rather than force, how it was, in the end, the perfect metaphor for legacy done right. And in the morning he woke to the sound of it flowing, clean and cold and healing, touching the land his father had protected, nourishing the future his son would inherit, connecting past and present and tomorrow in an endless cycle of renewal. The work continued, would always continue, because water, like love, like legacy, like the best of what humans could build together, never truly stopped flowing. It just changed forms, adapted, found new paths, kept moving forward toward the sea that waited for all rivers eventually. And that, Jim thought as he descended the stairs to make coffee and start another day of building, that was enough. More than enough. Everything.